The year is 1890, and in the northern city of Lille, France, a boy is born into a world on the edge of profound change. Europe, still reeling from the aftermath of the First World War, is poised on the threshold of the 20th century, a time of uncertainty and transformation. The streets of Paris hum with the echoes of a world in flux, as the old powers of Europe adjust to new realities, and the shape of the future begins to take form. This is the world that Charles de Gaulle, one of the most influential figures in modern French history, would come to know. His life, filled with moments of adversity, determination and legacy, would leave a deep imprint on the course of his nation and the broader world. From the child born into a family of intellectuals, to the young officer in the trenches of the First World War, to the resolute leader who guided France through the Second World War and beyond, de Gaulle's journey is one of quiet but unyielding strength. It is a journey defined by his refusal to compromise on France's sovereignty, by his vision for a united Europe, and by his unwavering dedication to his country. As you listen to this story, let the calm rhythm of history guide you through the life of a man whose decision shaped not only his nation, but the course of history itself. Feel free to relax, and as you listen, allow your mind to drift, absorbing the life of Charles de Gaulle, a life that echoes through the history of the 20th century. If you enjoy this journey, consider subscribing and share where you're listening from as we begin this calm exploration of a remarkable man and a remarkable era. Now, settle in as we begin our story. Charles-André Joseph-Marie de Gaulle was born on November 22, 1890 in the city of Lille, located in the northernmost region of France. His father, Henri de Gaulle, was a highly respected teacher, intellectual and a deeply committed nationalist who instilled in his son the values of discipline, patriotism and integrity. Charles's mother, Jeanne Maillot, was equally dedicated to the education of her children, emphasizing the importance of intellectual pursuit and moral responsibility. The atmosphere of the de Gaulle household was one of quiet reverence for history and national pride, qualities that would shape Charles's worldview from a young age. De Gaulle's family came from a long line of French Catholics and served in various professional roles, often within the intellectual or military spheres. However, their particular brand of devotion to their country was grounded not only in their social status, but also in their belief in the ideals of the French Revolution, especially the importance of liberty, equality, and fraternity. From an early age, Charles's parents encouraged him to explore the depth of French history, and he grew up surrounded by the weight of that heritage. The young de Gaulle, with his natural inclination for introspection, found solace in books and formal learning. His childhood was spent in an environment that encouraged both intellectual and moral fortitude, where discussions around French history, philosophy and politics were frequent. In fact, it was in these early years that de Gaulle's profound love for his nation took root. It was said that he often demonstrated a strong sense of duty toward his country, even in his youth, feeling a responsibility to the future of France. The discussions around him in his early life painted a clear picture of a France that had seen both grandeur and ruin, an empire once vast and powerful, now navigating the precarious edges of European instability. His schooling began at a local school in Lille, where he was known for his seriousness and introspective nature. A strong, quiet student, de Gaulle was far more focused on academic pursuits than his peers. At the age of 13, he enrolled in a prestigious boarding school in Paris, the College Stanislas, which helped to cultivate his intellectual and academic abilities. It was here that de Gaulle began to engage in more structured thinking about the world, particularly about France's place in it. The lessons at the College Stanislas, which ranged from history and literature to Latin and philosophy, would serve as the foundation for his future political thinking. During these years, de Gaulle's exceptional height, he would eventually grow to be 6 feet 5 inches, became a physical trait that would set him apart. His imposing stature, combined with his serious demeanour, left an impression on those around him. Even as a child, he carried himself with a gravity beyond his years, and those who met him often remarked on his commanding presence. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, France was undergoing significant political and social changes. The French Third Republic, which had been established in 1871 following the Franco-Prussian War, was a period of instability marked by frequent political crises, rising nationalism, and the loss of French territories. This environment created an ideal backdrop for young de Gaulle's formative years. His mind was shaped not just by the classics he read or the subjects he studied, but by the tumultuous state of the nation in which he lived. While still in Paris, de Gaulle began to take an interest in military history and strategy, an interest that would guide much of his adult life. He was particularly influenced by the military campaigns of Napoleon Bonaparte and the strategic innovations brought forth during the Napoleonic Wars. The emphasis on tactical genius and strong visionary leadership would later inform his own actions on the world stage. During this time, he started to understand that war, in addition to being a matter of politics, was also a matter of willpower, leadership, and unyielding resolve, qualities that he admired in both military figures and statesmen. At the age of 18, de Gaulle's family, ever keen to secure his future, encouraged him to pursue a career in the French military. This decision, seemingly a natural progression for someone from his background, marked the beginning of Charles de Gaulle's lifelong connection to military service. His parents' encouragement to follow in the military's footsteps was not only an extension of his intellectual upbringing, but also rooted in a belief that a career in the military would allow him to serve his country in the most direct and impactful way. In 1909, de Gaulle entered the prestigious École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr, the French equivalent of West Point, a training ground for the country's most promising officers. It was here, in the rigorous environment of the academy, that de Gaulle began to forge his identity as a military leader. The school was known for its strict discipline and the cultivation of leaders who could think critically and lead decisively. It would be at Saint-Cyr that de Gaulle's ideas about military leadership, duty and service would be shaped, an experience that would eventually influence his approach to governance and military strategy. However, his time at Saint-Cyr was not without its challenges. De Gaulle struggled with the physical demands of the academy, particularly with the stamina required for certain physical activities. Despite this, he displayed a rare combination of intellectual sharpness and physical resilience. He graduated in 1912 and quickly earned a commission as a second lieutenant in the French army. By this time, Europe was already on the brink of war. The tensions between European powers were palpable, and the rise of militarism and national alliances created a volatile political climate. De Gaulle's early career would be shaped by the looming threat of war, but he could not have known at the time just how deeply the coming conflict would affect both his career and the trajectory of his life. As he prepared to embark on his military service, de Gaulle could not have anticipated the massive upheaval that would soon envelop Europe. Yet, he was undoubtedly aware that his training and education had prepared him for something significant. His keen sense of duty, inherited from his family, now combined with a growing understanding of military strategy. His early life, from the intellectual stimulation provided by his parents to the grueling demands of Saint-Cyr, had given him the tools he would need to face the challenges ahead. Thus, in the years leading up to World War I, Charles de Gaulle found himself standing at the intersection of his youth and the trials of the coming war. With the echoes of a troubled Europe at his back and his sense of duty and destiny ahead of him, de Gaulle's early years laid the foundation for a life that would be defined by service, challenge, and unyielding dedication to the future of France. Charles de Gaulle's path to leadership began in the quiet halls of Saint-Cyr, the prestigious military academy where many of France's most accomplished officers honed their skills. Born into a family with a deep respect for intellectualism and patriotism, de Gaulle's parents nurtured a sense of duty in him from an early age, and it was clear that his future would be shaped by the ideals of discipline, resilience, and national pride. However, his early life was not without struggles, and the challenges of education and military training would soon test his character. De Gaulle's childhood was one of quiet reflection. As he grew up in an atmosphere that valued knowledge as much as physical strength, his father, Henri de Gaulle, was a teacher with a particular interest in history, and this academic environment was influential in shaping Charles's view of the world. Henri was a man of conviction, instilling in Charles a sense of duty to France that would define his life. His mother, Jeanne Maillot, was equally instrumental in fostering a strong sense of responsibility, teaching Charles the importance of honour, perseverance, and integrity. It was in this environment that de Gaulle's intellectual and moral compass took shape. Though not necessarily an outstanding student, de Gaulle was a serious and introspective young man. He was not one for idle distractions or frivolity. In school, his focus was on the pursuit of knowledge, particularly in the realms of history, literature, and philosophy. His parents' intellectual influence and the family's reverence for French heritage made de Gaulle a student of France's past, and this connection to history would prove vital throughout his life. Despite his academic interest, de Gaulle's physical stature, he would grow to be over 6.5 feet tall, set him apart. As a young man, he was often described as awkward and uncomfortable with his size, but this physical difference would become a defining feature of his presence. His towering height made him stand out in any room, and it was said that his imposing figure matched the strength of his character. Even as a young student, he demonstrated a quiet confidence, though his seriousness sometimes made him seem distant to others. In his teenage years, de Gaulle's parents decided that he should attend the prestigious College Stanislas in Paris. The decision was based on their belief that the educational opportunities there would better prepare Charles for a future in the military, which seemed an appropriate path for a young man of his intellectual and physical caliber. The College Stanislas, an esteemed institution that shaped the minds of many future leaders, provided de Gaulle with a rigorous education in the humanities, further expanding his intellectual horizons. At Stanislas, de Gaulle thrived in an environment that demanded discipline and excellence. His deepening understanding of French history, politics, and military theory reinforced the values that had been instilled in him by his family. He excelled in subjects like Latin, French literature, and philosophy, absorbing the lessons of ancient thinkers and political philosophers. It was during these formative years that de Gaulle's intellectual interest in military strategy began to take shape. In his private moments, de Gaulle often pored over books on military history, particularly those focused on Napoleon Bonaparte, whose strategies and leadership would have a profound influence on him. However, despite his academic success, de Gaulle's physicality remained a challenge for him during his early years at Stanislas. His height, combined with his less-than-athletic build, led to occasional teasing from his peers. While not a particularly social young man, de Gaulle took these experiences in stride, learning to carry himself with quiet dignity. His discomfort in social settings would remain a characteristic throughout his life, but he had an inner resolve that drove him to focus on his education and personal growth, rather than seeking the approval of others. As a teenager, de Gaulle began to develop his deep-seated sense of duty to France. He was becoming increasingly aware of the fragility of France's position in Europe, especially in light of the growing tensions and the rise of militarism in Germany. De Gaulle, ever the student of history, understood the importance of military preparedness and the value of strong leadership. He also became aware of the responsibility that came with serving his nation. The early lessons of honour, discipline, and duty that his parents had taught him now began to take on a deeper meaning as he envisioned his future role in France's military. In 1909, at the age of 19, de Gaulle entered the École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr, a military academy that had produced some of France's most revered officers. Saint-Cyr was a rigorous and demanding institution, where de Gaulle would face both intellectual and physical challenges. The training was grueling, and for a young man who had not excelled in physical pursuits earlier in life, it was a test of endurance and perseverance. Saint-Cyr, while focused on military training, also emphasized intellectual development. It was at Saint-Cyr that de Gaulle would begin to explore more deeply the concepts of strategy, tactics, and leadership. His education here would leave a lasting imprint on his thinking, shaping his approach to warfare and leadership. Throughout his years at the academy, de Gaulle earned respect for his intellect, but it was his perseverance that stood out to his instructors. While he was not the fastest or the most physically adept, his ability to endure, learn, and push through adversity marked him as someone destined for greatness. Despite the challenges, de Gaulle's academic performance at Saint-Cyr was stellar. His instructors recognized his capacity for critical thinking and strategic analysis, traits that would serve him well later in life. However, de Gaulle's journey was not without its struggles. His physical limitations made certain aspects of military life more difficult for him, but rather than allow this to deter him, he learned to overcome these obstacles through sheer determination. His growth at Saint-Cyr was not just intellectual but also personal, as he learned the value of resilience, adaptability, and perseverance. By the time de Gaulle graduated from Saint-Cyr in 1912, his future seemed certain. He was assigned to the French army as a second lieutenant, ready to begin his military career. Little did he know that the impending storm of World War I would shape his early career and test him in ways he had never anticipated. As de Gaulle embarked on his military service, he carried with him the lessons of his childhood and education, lessons of discipline, honour, and intellectual rigour. His early years of training and study had equipped him with the tools necessary to lead, and as the world began to descend into war, Charles de Gaulle was prepared to face the challenges ahead, armed with a strong sense of duty and a profound belief in the importance of national service. After graduating from the prestigious École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr in 1912, Charles de Gaulle began his career as a second lieutenant in the French army, stationed with the 33rd Infantry Regiment. It was the beginning of what would be a long and eventful military career, but de Gaulle's early years as an officer were far from uneventful. His time in the military would expose him to the stark realities of warfare, and it was on the battlefields of World War I that de Gaulle's leadership, abilities and resilience would begin to truly shine. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 had caught Europe by surprise. The complexities of the alliance system and the rapid escalation of tensions between the major European powers quickly turned what seemed like a localized conflict into a full-scale war. De Gaulle, like many of his peers, had entered the military service with the belief that he would play a role in defending his country's honour and sovereignty. But the brutal reality of trench warfare soon revealed a different world, one where survival was the first priority. De Gaulle was initially assigned to the Western Front, the scene of the war's most intense and sustained battles. France, along with its allies, was locked in a desperate struggle against the German Empire. The war was characterized by grueling, unrelenting trench warfare, where soldiers faced not only the enemy but the elements, disease, and the constant threat of death. The horrors of the front were unlike anything de Gaulle could have anticipated, and it was here that he would begin to develop the qualities that would define his leadership style in later years. As a young officer, de Gaulle was thrust into the chaos of war, and he quickly gained first-hand experience in combat. His early days in the trenches were marked by a mix of exhaustion, uncertainty, and terror. Yet even amidst the brutality, de Gaulle demonstrated a level of courage and strategic insight that set him apart from many of his fellow officers. His intellectual training, which had emphasized the importance of strategy and tactical thinking, began to manifest in his approach to battle. De Gaulle's leadership abilities were immediately apparent. He was not one to shy away from danger, and he quickly gained the respect of his men. His natural height, which had been a source of awkwardness in his younger years, now became an asset. He was seen as a commanding figure, someone who could inspire confidence even in the most harrowing of situations. Yet de Gaulle's greatest strength was his ability to remain calm and focused under pressure. In an environment where fear and uncertainty ran rampant, his steady presence was a source of reassurance for his troops. During the war, de Gaulle was involved in several significant engagements, including the Battle of Verdun in 1916. Verdun was one of the largest and most devastating battles of the war, with both the French and German forces suffering heavy casualties. The battle became a symbol of the French determination to resist, but it also marked a pivotal moment in de Gaulle's development as a leader. He was wounded twice during the battle, first in the chest and later in the leg. Despite these injuries, de Gaulle refused to retreat and continued to lead his men. His bravery and commitment to his comrades earned him a reputation as a resilient and determined officer. While de Gaulle was recovering from his injuries in 1916, he began to formulate ideas about the future of warfare. His experiences in the trenches left an indelible mark on him, and he began to question the effectiveness of traditional tactics in modern warfare. The stalemated trench warfare that had characterized much of World War I struck him as inefficient and wasteful. It was during this period of recovery that de Gaulle began to develop his thinking on the future of military strategy, a vision that would come to define much of his career. He believed that modern warfare demanded mobility, flexibility, and rapid response. He was critical of the static, entrenched nature of trench warfare and argued for the use of armoured vehicles and mechanized units to break through enemy lines. De Gaulle's views on military strategy were far ahead of his time. While many of his contemporaries continued to rely on outdated tactics, de Gaulle's ideas about the use of tanks and armoured vehicles as a means of breaking the deadlock of trench warfare were seen as revolutionary. Unfortunately, at this stage of his career, his ideas were not widely accepted, and he often found himself at odds with traditional military thinking. De Gaulle's ideas about armoured warfare were initially met with resistance, but they laid the groundwork for his later success as a military leader. As the war continued, de Gaulle's ability to adapt to the changing nature of warfare became increasingly apparent. He learned from his experiences on the front lines, recognizing that victory in modern warfare would depend not only on the strength of one's army, but also on the ability to think creatively and adapt to new technologies and strategies. In 1917, after his recovery, de Gaulle returned to the front lines, where he continued to demonstrate his leadership abilities. His dedication to his men and his willingness to lead from the front earned him further respect among his peers. His ability to inspire and motivate others, even in the darkest moments of the war, marked him as a leader who was not only capable, but also deeply committed to the cause. It was during this period of service that de Gaulle began to earn his first major military decorations, including the prestigious Croix de Guerre for his bravery and leadership in combat. These honours were a reflection of his dedication and determination, as well as his growing reputation as a capable and strategic officer. As the war drew to a close in 1918, de Gaulle had established himself as a rising star within the French military. However, the war had taken its toll on him, and he, like many of his comrades, was deeply affected by the horrors he had witnessed. The constant threat of death, the devastation of the landscape, and the loss of so many soldiers weighed heavily on him. It was a burden he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The end of World War I marked a turning point in de Gaulle's career. Having witnessed the immense cost of the war, he knew that the future of France and the world would be shaped by the lessons learned in the trenches. He was determined to ensure that France would never again be caught unprepared for war. His experiences during the war would stay with him as he moved forward in his career, influencing his views on military strategy, leadership, and national security. In the years following the war, de Gaulle would continue to develop his ideas about modern warfare, but his path would not always be smooth. Despite his early successes and his growing reputation, he faced setbacks and challenges in the years that followed. Yet his experiences during World War I had given him the resilience and determination to persevere. As he moved forward in his career, de Gaulle would prove that his time in the trenches had not only shaped his military thinking, but had also laid the foundation for the leader he would become. The end of World War I brought a sense of relief to much of Europe. But for Charles de Gaulle, the conclusion of the war marked the beginning of a new set of challenges. The horrors of the battlefield had left their mark, but de Gaulle's experiences during the war, both as a soldier and a thinker, had shaped him into a man with a vision for the future of France and the world. While Europe slowly began the process of rebuilding, de Gaulle, now in his late 20s, was already formulating ideas that would guide his path over the next few decades. After the war, de Gaulle was assigned to various military posts, and for a time, it seemed that his career might follow the standard trajectory of a career officer. Yet his experiences during the war had fundamentally changed him, and his growing belief in the need for military reform and modernization began to separate him from the more traditional military establishment. De Gaulle's military superiors and colleagues in the post-war period often saw him as a man apart, an officer with grand ideas and an unconventional approach to warfare. His insistence on modernizing France's military forces and his early advocacy for the use of tanks and mechanized warfare were not well received by many in the military leadership, who were entrenched in the traditional practices that had defined World War I. Many in the military establishment were focused on returning to the old methods of combat, while de Gaulle saw the future of warfare in terms of mobility, innovation, and strategic flexibility. It was during this period that de Gaulle began to write extensively about military strategy. His first major work, La France et son armée, France and her army, was published in 1924. The book was a bold statement of his belief in the need for a radically reformed French military, one that would be capable of responding to the challenges of modern warfare. In the book, de Gaulle argued that the French army needed to embrace new technologies, including tanks and armoured vehicles, and develop new tactics that would allow it to fight effectively against a mechanised enemy. Despite the book's importance, it was largely ignored by the French military establishment, and de Gaulle was often seen as a lone voice calling for change. However, this period of intellectual work gave de Gaulle the opportunity to hone his ideas and reflect on the future of France. In the years following the war, de Gaulle began to focus less on the tactical aspects of military leadership, and more on the broader political and strategic questions facing France. In the 1920s and 1930s, de Gaulle began to emerge as a public figure. He sought to translate his military ideas into a broader vision for France's future, particularly its role in the increasingly turbulent international landscape. During this period, Europe was caught in the grip of the interwar years, a time of rising tensions, economic instability, and the looming threat of fascism and totalitarianism. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany, along with the increasing militarization of Europe, alarmed many, including de Gaulle, who was acutely aware of the dangers facing France. De Gaulle was particularly concerned by the fragility of France's military and political institutions. He saw the political instability of the French Third Republic as a significant weakness, and he was convinced that a stronger, more unified France would be essential in facing the growing threats in Europe. His thoughts during this time were largely shaped by his experiences during World War I, where he had seen firsthand the consequences of poor leadership and strategic missteps. He was determined that France should never again be caught unprepared for war. One of the central tenets of de Gaulle's thinking during the interwar years was the importance of French sovereignty. He believed that the future of France depended on its ability to maintain a strong and independent position in world affairs. His vision for France was one of resilience, self-sufficiency, and national pride. He was deeply critical of the international diplomatic efforts that sought to appease Germany and other rising powers, believing that such approaches only encouraged further aggression. De Gaulle's strong belief in French sovereignty would later become a defining feature of his leadership during World War II and throughout his political career. While de Gaulle focused much of his energy on military reform and political advocacy, his career began to evolve in unexpected ways. In 1927, he was assigned to the French military mission in Poland, where he observed the development of armoured forces. He also travelled to the Soviet Union, where he studied the Red Army and its methods. These experiences broadened his understanding of modern warfare and helped to shape his vision for a more mechanised, mobile French military. He began to recognise the importance of armoured divisions and air support, which would become central elements of his military thinking. During this period, de Gaulle also began to move into the political sphere. He was not only interested in military reform, but also in the broader political context of France's future. He became more involved in the intellectual and political debates of the time, writing articles, giving speeches, and establishing connections with key figures in French politics. He became increasingly frustrated with the inability of the French political system to address the pressing issues of the day, including the growing threat of fascism in Europe and the weakness of the French government in the face of these challenges. In 1934, de Gaulle was appointed to the post of colonel, and in the following years his growing reputation as a military strategist began to attract the attention of higher-ranking officials. However, despite his increasing stature within the military, de Gaulle continued to be a man apart from the mainstream military leadership. His views on the future of warfare, particularly his belief in the need for mechanization, were still considered radical by many of his peers. By the late 1930s, de Gaulle had come to believe that France's military strategy was woefully inadequate for the modern world. He was critical of the French reliance on the Maginot Line, a series of fortifications along the French-German border, which he saw as a defensive and outdated strategy. Instead, de Gaulle argued that France needed a more flexible and mobile military strategy, one that could quickly respond to new threats. His ideas on military reform, though still controversial, would eventually come to play a significant role in the French military's response to the German invasion of France in 1940. As Europe moved closer to the outbreak of World War II, de Gaulle's role in the military and political spheres was becoming ever more significant. His views on military strategy and French sovereignty would soon come to the forefront, as the world was once again plunged into conflict. As the 1930s gave way to the tumult of the 1940s, Charles de Gaulle found himself standing at crossroads. Throughout his life, he had been deeply concerned with the defence of France, and his military career had been devoted to the idea of ensuring that his country was never caught unprepared for war. Yet despite his advocacy for modernization and mechanized warfare, the French military remained largely entrenched in outdated strategies. When the Second World War broke out in September 1939, de Gaulle's concerns were realized in ways that would forever alter the course of his life and the history of France. In the early days of the war, de Gaulle's role within the French military remained somewhat peripheral, despite his growing stature as a military strategist. France, like much of Europe, had hoped to avoid another devastating conflict after the First World War. But the rise of Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler had made such hope untenable. As Germany expanded its territorial ambitions across Europe, France found itself once again facing a direct military threat. When Hitler's forces invaded Poland in September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany, marking the official beginning of the Second World War. The conflict, however, would soon take a dramatic turn. In the month that followed, the French military, underprepared and slow to respond, found itself struggling to keep pace with the speed and efficiency of the German blitzkrieg. a new form of warfare characterized by rapid movement, mechanized units, and overwhelming force. In the early stages of the war, de Gaulle had been appointed to a prominent position as the Under-Secretary of State for War in the French government, a move that aligned him with the new French leadership in the face of the growing German threat. Despite this position, de Gaulle's influence over the French military and political establishment remained limited. Much of the French leadership, including Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, was preoccupied with the existing defensive strategy, particularly the Maginot Line, a line of fortifications built along the German-French border. However, de Gaulle, ever the forward thinker, recognized the limitations of such a strategy. He had long criticized the reliance on static defenses and had advocated for a more mobile and flexible military response. In the spring of 1940, the German forces executed a rapid invasion of France, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line and attacking through Belgium. The French military, caught off guard by the speed and precision of the German advance, was quickly overwhelmed. In just 6 weeks, the Germans had defeated the French army, and on June 14, 1940, German forces entered Paris. France, once a dominant power in Europe, was left in ruins, and the government was forced to flee to Vichy in the unoccupied southern part of the country. The collapse of France shocked the world, and the French people were left reeling from the defeat. Amid this chaos, de Gaulle's role in the defence of France would take an unexpected turn. As the French government faced the collapse of its military and the rapid occupation of much of the country, de Gaulle refused to accept the terms of surrender that were being proposed by the Vichy government, led by Marshal Philippe Pétain. Pétain, a hero of World War I, advocated for an armistice with Germany and the creation of a collaborationist government in southern France. De Gaulle, however, rejected the idea of surrender. He believed that France's dignity and future could only be preserved through continued resistance. As the Germans began their occupation of Paris, de Gaulle made a bold decision. He would leave France and continue the fight from abroad. On June 17, 1940, he fled to London, where he met with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had already been a staunch ally of France in the early stages of the war. De Gaulle's decision to abandon the French government and escape to Britain would be the catalyst for the creation of a new movement, one that would shape the fate of France during the war. On June 18, 1940, from the safety of the BBC studios in London, de Gaulle made a historic radio broadcast that would become one of the most famous moments of his life. Speaking in a steady, resolute voice, he called upon the French people to resist, to continue the fight against the Germans, and to maintain hope despite the seemingly overwhelming odds. His message was simple but powerful. France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war. De Gaulle's speech was the beginning of the Free French Forces, a movement that sought to rally all French citizens, soldiers, and resistance groups to continue fighting against the German occupation. De Gaulle's refusal to accept defeat, coupled with his vision of a free and independent France, struck a chord with many French citizens who were still reeling from the surrender and occupation. Though his message was initially met with skepticism and resistance, it was also met with hope, and the seeds of a growing resistance movement were planted. In the months that followed, de Gaulle worked tirelessly to build an international coalition of Free French forces. He gained the support of the British government, which recognized him as the legitimate leader of the French resistance, and he began to build relationships with other Allied powers, including the United States. De Gaulle's unwavering commitment to France's sovereignty and his determination to resist the Nazi occupation became the rallying cry for many who had lost faith in the Vichy government's willingness to confront the Germans. Throughout the remainder of 1940 and into 1941, de Gaulle's influence as the leader of the Free French forces continued to grow. He established a government in exile in London, one that sought to maintain France's dignity and fight for its liberation. Though his efforts were often undermined by political infighting and by the reluctance of some of the Allied powers to recognise his legitimacy, de Gaulle remained resolute in his belief that France could and would reclaim its place in the world. The Battle of France had ended in defeat, but for Charles de Gaulle the fight for France was only just beginning. His vision for a free and independent France, untainted by collaboration with Nazi Germany, would be tested time and time again in the years to come. Yet his call to resistance, his unyielding faith in the possibility of victory, and his refusal to accept defeat would become the defining characteristics of his leadership during the war. Following his historic radio broadcast on June 18, 1940, Charles de Gaulle began the monumental task of leading the Free French forces in the fight against Nazi Germany. His leadership during this time would shape not only his legacy, but also the future of France. Though he faced significant challenges both from within and outside his movement, his unwavering resolve and steadfast belief in the liberation of France earned him the respect of both his followers and his enemies. In the immediate aftermath of de Gaulle's speech, France was in a state of shock and disarray. The country had been defeated militarily in less than 2 months, and the government, under Marshal Pétain, had decided to collaborate with Nazi Germany. Many French citizens felt betrayed by their leaders, and the Vichy regime, which controlled the unoccupied zone of France, represented the collapse of the ideals of the Republic. For those who refused to accept the armistice, de Gaulle's call to resistance became a beacon of hope. Despite his passionate appeals, de Gaulle's efforts to unite the French people were initially met with limited success. His exile in London placed him far from the heart of France, and the Vichy government, with its more immediate control over the nation, tried to undermine his influence at every turn. Furthermore, the idea of a leader in exile was a concept difficult for many to grasp, and de Gaulle had to work hard to establish his legitimacy both within France and in the international arena. However, as the war progressed, de Gaulle's leadership and vision began to resonate with more and more French citizens. His defiance of the Vichy government and his refusal to accept the notion that France was permanently defeated began to solidify his status as the leader of the Free French movement. He was no longer just a man calling for resistance. He became a symbol of France's potential to resist and ultimately prevail. One of de Gaulle's key challenges was to rally the French population, both those still in France and those in exile, around the idea of a free, independent France. This was a difficult task, as the country had been humiliated, and many of its people were either resigned to the situation or actively supporting the Vichy regime. But de Gaulle's charisma, his ability to inspire hope, and his unshakable belief in the sovereignty of France resonated with those who were unwilling to accept the status quo. In 1941, de Gaulle began to form the Free French government in exile, which was initially based in London. This government, though not formally recognised by all Allied powers, began to coordinate efforts with the British and later the United States. De Gaulle's insistence on French sovereignty, even in exile, was one of the key elements that differentiated him from other leaders of the resistance. He was not merely a figurehead. He sought to ensure that, when the war was over, France would be able to reclaim its rightful place in the post-war world. One of de Gaulle's most significant achievements during this period was his ability to create a military force capable of contributing meaningfully to the Allied war effort. Despite being limited in resources, the Free French forces began to organise and carry out operations against German and Vichy-controlled territories. From 1941 onwards, de Gaulle's forces participated in a number of key military campaigns, including the liberation of French colonies in Africa and the eventual landing of Free French troops in Normandy alongside the Allies. As de Gaulle worked to expand the Free French forces, he also focused on building diplomatic relationships with the other Allied powers. Initially, the British government led by Winston Churchill was somewhat sceptical of de Gaulle's leadership, preferring to work with the Vichy government or other more moderate resistance groups. However, de Gaulle's perseverance and his ability to maintain a consistent stance on French independence eventually won him the respect of the British. By 1941, de Gaulle had secured British recognition as the leader of the Free French forces, and his position as the head of the French resistance was solidified. De Gaulle's leadership was not without its difficulties. Throughout the war, he faced constant challenges to his authority, both from within the Free French movement and from the Allies. Many of the other resistance groups, particularly those led by communists and more left-wing factions, were hesitant to follow de Gaulle's lead. There was also the matter of the United States, which, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was initially reluctant to recognize de Gaulle's government in exile. Roosevelt preferred to deal with the Vichy government or, at times, with the internal French resistance, viewing de Gaulle as an obstacle to broader cooperation. This caused significant tension between de Gaulle and the United States. Despite these challenges, de Gaulle's leadership remained unyielding. He refused to compromise on his vision of a free and independent France, one that would emerge from the war not as a puppet of the Allies but as a sovereign nation. His defiance in the face of such challenges was central to his role as a leader of the resistance. His firm stance also made him a figurehead for the French people, who longed for liberation and a return to national pride. One of the turning points in de Gaulle's leadership came in 1943 when, after pressure from the Allies, he formed the French National Committee in Algiers, bringing together various factions of the resistance into a unified body. This marked the first real step toward reconciling the different elements of the French resistance under a single banner. De Gaulle's leadership was crucial in ensuring that the French resistance could operate as a cohesive force, coordinating with the Allies to undermine German control in France. By 1944, as the Allied forces prepared for the D-Day invasion, de Gaulle's influence had reached its zenith. The success of the landings in Normandy and the subsequent liberation of France provided the final validation of de Gaulle's leadership. His vision of a free France was now within reach, and the Allied powers began to recognize the importance of de Gaulle's role in the post-war reconstruction of Europe. The Free French forces, now fully integrated into the Allied war effort, played a key role in the liberation of Paris in August 1944. On August 25, 1944, as French troops entered the capital, de Gaulle stood before a jubilant crowd, a symbol of France's resilience and the realization of his long-held vision for a liberated and sovereign nation. His return to Paris was a moment of triumph, not just for him personally, but for all those who had fought with him in the years of exile and resistance. De Gaulle's leadership of the Free French forces during World War II was a defining chapter in his life. Through sheer will, determination, and an unwavering commitment to the ideals of liberty and French sovereignty, he emerged as one of the most important figures in 20th century history. The story of his leadership is one of resistance, resilience, and a refusal to accept defeat no matter the odds. The liberation of France in 1944 marked the culmination of Charles de Gaulle's long, hard-fought campaign for the country's freedom and sovereignty. After years of exile and resistance, de Gaulle's return to France symbolized the triumph of French resilience and his own unwavering commitment to restoring France's dignity. Yet his return was not just a moment of personal victory. It was the beginning of a new phase in French history, one that would require de Gaulle to navigate the difficult task of rebuilding a nation shattered by war. By the summer of 1944, the tides of war had shifted decisively in favour of the Allies. The successful landings on D-Day, June 6, 1944, opened a new front in Western Europe, and Allied forces began pushing German troops back across France. With the liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944, the French capital was finally free from Nazi occupation, but France's path forward remained uncertain. The country had been devastated by years of war, occupation and internal division, and the political and social landscape was in disarray. De Gaulle's return to Paris was a moment of immense significance, both for him personally and for the French people. As the leader of the Free French forces, de Gaulle had long been the symbol of France's resistance to Nazi oppression. Now, as the Allied forces marched into Paris, de Gaulle's arrival was seen as the dawning of a new era for France. It was his chance to prove to the world, and to the French people, that the country could rise from the ashes of war and reclaim its rightful place as a great nation. When de Gaulle arrived in Paris, he was greeted by jubilant crowds, who saw him not only as a liberator, but as the embodiment of French resolve and defiance. The scene of de Gaulle marching down the Champs-Élysées, flanked by French and Allied forces, became one of the most iconic moments of the war. It was a moment of national pride, a moment when the French people could finally celebrate their freedom after years of occupation. But de Gaulle's return to power was not without challenges. The political landscape of post-war France was complex and fraught with tension. While de Gaulle had been the leader of the Free French forces during the war, his authority was far from unchallenged. The Vichy government had collaborated with the Nazis, and many of the individuals who had supported or participated in the Vichy regime remained influential in French politics. De Gaulle's leadership was also contested by other factions of the resistance, as well as by left-wing and communist groups who sought a different vision for post-war France. In the immediate aftermath of the war, de Gaulle assumed control of the provisional government of the French Republic, which was tasked with overseeing the transition from occupation to a restored French Republic. His first priority was to stabilize the country, rebuild the government, and ensure that France's sovereignty was fully restored. This was a difficult task, as France had been politically and economically weakened by the war, and many of its institutions had been compromised during the years of collaboration with Nazi Germany. De Gaulle's vision for post-war France was one of national unity and strength. He sought to create a new political order, one that would ensure that France would never again be vulnerable to occupation or foreign control. He envisioned a strong executive government, capable of decisively addressing both domestic and international challenges. His goal was to ensure that France's future would be shaped by the will of the French people, rather than by the interests of foreign powers. In order to accomplish this, de Gaulle initiated a series of sweeping political reforms. In 1944, he introduced the Ordonnance, which laid the groundwork for the post-war reconstruction of France. These reforms focused on the rebuilding of the French economy, the establishment of a social welfare system, and the restructuring of the French military. De Gaulle also oversaw the creation of a new constitution, which would eventually form the basis of the Fourth Republic. However, de Gaulle's vision for France was not universally accepted. His insistence on strong executive power was seen as authoritarian by some political factions, particularly by left-wing and communist groups. These factions, which had played a significant role in the resistance, were dissatisfied with de Gaulle's centralized approach to governance. They advocated for a more parliamentary system, with a greater emphasis on popular representation and the power of the legislature. In the face of this political opposition, de Gaulle found himself increasingly isolated. By 1946, after less than 2 years in power, de Gaulle resigned from the position of provisional head of state. His resignation marked the end of his brief tenure as the leader of post-war France, but it also signalled his frustration with the political system and the divisions within French society. De Gaulle had envisioned a strong, unified France, but the political reality of the Fourth Republic, with its fragmented parties and unstable coalitions, made it difficult for him to achieve his goals. De Gaulle's resignation from the government in 1946 did not, however, mark the end of his influence on French politics. While he stepped away from active political life, he remained a powerful symbol of French nationalism and sovereignty. In the years that followed, de Gaulle continued to be a vocal critic of the Fourth Republic, which he viewed as weak and incapable of providing the leadership that France needed. His belief in the importance of a strong executive, capable of acting decisively in times of crisis, remained a central tenet of his political philosophy. Though de Gaulle was no longer in power, his vision for France's future would not be forgotten. His leadership during the war had earned him the respect of many French citizens, and his calls for a more stable and unified France continued to resonate in the post-war years. As the Fourth Republic struggled with political instability, de Gaulle's influence only grew. In 1958, after years of political turmoil and instability, de Gaulle was called upon once again to lead France. The crisis in Algeria, which has been escalating since the 1950s, threatened to tear the country apart. Faced with the growing violence in Algeria and the instability of the Fourth Republic, the French government turned to de Gaulle as the man who could restore order and stability. De Gaulle's return to power in 1958 marked the beginning of a new chapter in his political career. He would go on to create the Fifth Republic, a new political system designed to provide greater stability and stronger executive authority. His return to power was not just a personal victory, but a victory for the vision of France that he had long championed, a France that would remain strong, independent and sovereign in the face of external and internal challenges. After stepping down from leadership in 1946, Charles de Gaulle spent over a decade in relative political exile. Despite his resignation, his influence never waned, and he remained a central figure in French politics, especially as the Fourth Republic continued to struggle with political instability, infighting, and an inability to resolve the crisis in Algeria. By 1958, after years of frustration with the inefficiency of the government and the escalation of the Algerian War, France found itself at a critical juncture, and de Gaulle, despite his earlier retirement, was once again called upon to lead. The Fourth Republic, established after World War II, was a fragile system. Though it sought to rebuild France from the devastation of the war, it was beset by political fragmentation, frequent changes in government, and an inability to cope with the ongoing struggles in French colonies, particularly in Algeria. The rise of nationalist movements in Africa, the growing unrest in Algeria, and a government that seemed incapable of taking decisive action, created a climate of chaos and dissatisfaction within France. The war in Algeria had become a key issue, with many French citizens demanding an end to the conflict, while others called for more aggressive military action to maintain control. By 1958, the situation had reached a breaking point. The political system of the Fourth Republic was failing, and the prospect of civil war loomed over France. Amid this turmoil, military factions in Algeria threatened to rise up against the French government, and the crisis reached its peak with the possibility of a coup in Paris. In the face of these crises, the French government turned to de Gaulle, hoping that his leadership could provide stability and a solution to the growing problems in Algeria. De Gaulle's return to power was not immediate or guaranteed. There was deep opposition from various political factions, and some feared that de Gaulle would seek to establish an authoritarian regime. However, the crisis in Algeria and the failure of the Fourth Republic to deal with it created a sense of urgency. As the situation became more dire, de Gaulle's supporters rallied around him, calling for his return to leadership. In May 1958, as political instability threatened to overwhelm the country, de Gaulle was given the mandate to form a new government. De Gaulle's return was initially framed as a temporary measure to address the crisis, but it marked the beginning of a profound transformation in France's political system. He recognized that the Fourth Republic's system, with its weak executive and constant government crises, was not suited to the challenges facing France. He believed that France needed a strong, stable government, one capable of decisive action in both domestic and foreign affairs, To achieve this, de Gaulle proposed the creation of a new constitution that would establish a stronger executive branch, with the president holding substantial powers, something that had been lacking in the fragmented Fourth Republic. The new constitution, which de Gaulle helped to craft, established the Fifth Republic in 1958. The Fifth Republic would be marked by a stronger presidency, and de Gaulle's role as president would be central to the system. Under the new constitution, the president would have the power to appoint the prime minister, dissolve the National Assembly, and exercise direct control over foreign and military policy. This new system was designed to provide the political stability that France had lacked for so long. The strength of the executive was meant to ensure that the government could act decisively in times of crisis, particularly in areas like Algeria. De Gaulle's vision for the Fifth Republic was grounded in his belief that France needed a strong and independent state, one that could assert its will on the global stage and ensure the country's sovereignty. He was determined to secure France's place as a global power and to end the years of political instability that had plagued the country since the war. His vision of a powerful presidency was controversial, especially among those who feared that he might seek to concentrate too much power in his own hands. However, de Gaulle argued that only a strong executive could guide France through the challenges it faced. In the summer of 1958, de Gaulle presented his new constitution to the French people through a referendum. The response was overwhelming. The French people voted in favour of the new constitution by a large margin, granting de Gaulle the mandate to create a new political system. The creation of the Fifth Republic marked a turning point in French history, as it laid the foundation for a more stable political environment that would last for decades. De Gaulle assumed the presidency of the Fifth Republic on January 8, 1959, and his leadership was immediately put to the test. His first priority was to address the crisis in Algeria, which had been the primary catalyst for his return to power. De Gaulle had long been a critic of the Algerian War, and he knew that he would have to find a way to resolve the conflict while maintaining France's national unity. In a dramatic shift from his earlier position, de Gaulle began to pursue a policy of self-determination for Algeria, recognizing that the war could not be won through military force alone. His willingness to negotiate with the Algerian independence movement, particularly the National Liberation Front, FLN, shocked many of his supporters, but it was a sign of de Gaulle's pragmatic approach to leadership. In 1962, after years of negotiations and political manoeuvring, de Gaulle reached an agreement with the FLN that led to the Evian Accords, which granted Algeria independence. The decision to grant Algeria independence was one of the most significant and controversial moves of de Gaulle's presidency, and it marked the end of a bitter, years-long war. While de Gaulle's decision was hailed by many as a courageous and necessary step, it also led to political unrest in France, particularly among those who'd supported the war effort and who felt that de Gaulle had betrayed them. Despite the controversy surrounding Algeria, de Gaulle's leadership during this period established him as a figure capable of making difficult decisions for the good of the nation. His ability to navigate the complexities of the Algerian war and to bring an end to the conflict was a testament to his political skill and determination. In the years that followed, de Gaulle continued to assert France's independence on the world stage, particularly in its foreign policy and its relations with the United States and NATO. His vision for France was one of national sovereignty, and he was determined to ensure that France would never again be a subordinate power in the international arena. As the first president of the Fifth Republic, Charles de Gaulle faced the monumental task of reshaping France's political system, restoring national unity, and reasserting the country's global stature. His presidency, which spanned from 1959 to 1969, would come to define modern France and solidify de Gaulle's legacy as a leader of immense vision and determination. Through both domestic reforms and assertive foreign policies, de Gaulle sought to create a strong, independent France, one that could no longer be dictated by external forces, particularly those of the United States or NATO. Upon assuming office in 1959, de Gaulle quickly set about consolidating power in the presidency, a central feature of the Fifth Republic that he had designed. The new constitution, which gave significant authority to the president, enabled de Gaulle to act decisively on issues of national importance, unencumbered by the political instability and parliamentary deadlock that had plagued the Fourth Republic. De Gaulle's vision for France was one of executive strength and political stability, and he was determined to establish a government that could navigate the challenges of the Cold War while maintaining France's sovereignty. One of de Gaulle's first significant acts as president was the creation of a more centralized, efficient government. He restructured France's political institutions to strengthen the presidency and reduce the influence of fragmented political parties. De Gaulle was deeply critical of the chaotic, coalition-driven politics that had characterized the Fourth Republic, and he worked to ensure that the executive branch could function independently and effectively. His emphasis on the power of the presidency was controversial at times, but it was central to his belief that France needed a strong leader to navigate the complexities of the modern world. De Gaulle's domestic policies were focused on rebuilding France's post-war economy, modernizing its infrastructure, and expanding its social welfare system. He oversaw a period of significant economic growth, often referred to as the Trente Glorieuses, the Glorious 30, which saw France experience an economic boom that lasted from the late 1940s to the early 1970s. During this period, France underwent rapid industrialization, with the country emerging as one of the world's major economic powers. De Gaulle's economic policies focused on investment in key industries, the development of the country's nuclear energy capabilities, and the expansion of France's international trade. Under his leadership, France became a modern, technologically advanced nation. Perhaps one of the most significant domestic accomplishments of de Gaulle's presidency was his emphasis on social welfare and the expansion of the French welfare state. In 1960, he introduced a series of reforms aimed at improving healthcare, pensions, and education. De Gaulle's social policies reflected his belief in the importance of a just society, one in which every citizen had access to the opportunities and services necessary for a dignified life. Though his economic and social policies were often conservative in nature, they were also forward-thinking and pragmatic, focused on ensuring that France could meet the needs of its growing population. While de Gaulle worked to strengthen France at home, his foreign policy was characterized by a staunch desire to maintain French independence and sovereignty. One of the most defining aspects of his presidency was his refusal to allow France to become subservient to the interests of the United States or NATO. De Gaulle's vision of an independent France was one in which the country would stand apart from the superpowers of the Cold War and pursue its own path on the world stage. One of de Gaulle's most notable foreign policy achievements was his decision to withdraw France from NATO's integrated military command in 1966. De Gaulle believed that France's sovereignty was incompatible with NATO's structure, which in his view subordinated France to the strategic priorities of the United States. He was particularly critical of the US nuclear policy, which he felt gave the United States too much influence over France's defense strategy. By removing French forces from NATO's command structure, de Gaulle asserted France's right to pursue an independent nuclear deterrence and to make decisions regarding its defense without outside interference. De Gaulle's pursuit of an independent nuclear capability was a cornerstone of his foreign policy. In 1960, France successfully tested its first atomic bomb, joining the ranks of the world's nuclear powers. This achievement was not just a symbol of France's technological prowess, but also a manifestation of de Gaulle's determination to ensure that France could defend itself without relying on foreign powers. He viewed nuclear weapons as essential to France's security and independence, and he was steadfast in his belief that France's military and political power should be based on its own capabilities rather than the protection of others. In addition to his nuclear ambitions, de Gaulle sought to assert France's leadership in the broader European context. He was a strong advocate for European unity, but his vision of Europe was one in which France would remain at the centre, free from the influence of other powers. De Gaulle believed that Europe should be a community of sovereign states, each maintaining its independence, and he sought to create a European economic community that would reflect this vision. His insistence on France's primacy in European affairs, however, often put him at odds with other European leaders, particularly those in the United Kingdom, who were wary of France's growing influence. De Gaulle's foreign policy was not just about asserting France's independence, it was also about protecting the country's interests in a rapidly changing world. His relationship with the United States, for instance, was often tense. While he recognized the strategic importance of the alliance with America, he was wary of becoming too reliant on the US in matters of defense and foreign policy. De Gaulle's approach to international relations was pragmatic. He sought to ensure that France could navigate the complexities of the Cold War without being drawn into the orbit of any one superpower. One of de Gaulle's most notable achievements in foreign policy was his role in establishing France as a global leader in the fight for peace and stability. Throughout his presidency, de Gaulle consistently advocated for peace, negotiation and dialogue, both in Europe and around the world. His stance on the Algerian War, for instance, demonstrated his ability to make difficult decisions in the interest of peace, despite the political and social turmoil that accompanied them. De Gaulle was not afraid to challenge the status quo, and his leadership was instrumental in shaping the modern geopolitical landscape. As de Gaulle's presidency continued, his popularity with the French people remained high, but the challenges of governance grew. In 1965, de Gaulle faced opposition to his policies, particularly over his decision to implement economic reforms and his handling of the French economy. Though he was re-elected in 1965, his second term would be marked by increased political unrest, particularly among the younger generation, who felt disconnected from his conservative vision. In May 1968, massive protests erupted across France, with students and workers demanding greater political freedoms, economic equality, and social reforms. De Gaulle, who had once been seen as the embodiment of stability, now faced an existential crisis. The protest threatened to tear the fabric of French society apart, and de Gaulle was forced to confront the growing discontent among the population. While de Gaulle's leadership had once seemed unassailable, by 1969, after navigating the tumult of May 1968, he realized that his era was coming to an end. The political climate had changed, and de Gaulle's vision of France, one rooted in strong executive power and national sovereignty, was increasingly at odds with the shifting expectations of the French people. In 1969, following a failed referendum on regional reform, de Gaulle chose to resign from the presidency, stepping away from the political stage that he had dominated for over a decade. Charles de Gaulle's resignation from the presidency in 1969 marked the end of an era in French politics, but it did not signify the end of his influence. After stepping down, de Gaulle withdrew from active political life, retreating to his private home in Colombey-les-Deux-Églises, a small village in northeastern France. It was here that he spent the final years of his life, reflecting on his legacy and the future of France. Though he no longer held political office, de Gaulle remained a figure of immense respect and admiration in France, and his influence continued to shape the country's political discourse. De Gaulle's resignation had come after a failed referendum on regional reforms and a proposed revision to the Senate, which he had hoped would streamline the French political system. The result was a setback for de Gaulle, who had envisioned a more centralized and efficient system of governance. However, the defeat did not diminish his stature. If anything, It solidified his image as a man of principle who was willing to step aside when he felt he could no longer serve the country effectively. He was succeeded by Georges Pompidou, his former prime minister, who'd worked closely with de Gaulle during his presidency. In his post-presidency years, de Gaulle remained a key figure in the intellectual and political life of France. He continued to write and reflect on the issues that had shaped his presidency and his vision for the country. One of his most notable works from this period was Mémoires de guerre, War Memoir, published in 3 volumes between 1954 and 1959. In this work, de Gaulle recounted his experiences during World War II and his leadership of the Free French forces, offering insight into the moral and strategic decisions he had made during the war. His memoirs became a key text for understanding his vision of leadership and his commitment to France's sovereignty. In the years following his resignation, de Gaulle remained a symbol of national unity and French independence. His time in power had transformed France, leaving an indelible mark on the country's political and economic landscape. His vision for a strong, independent France had been realized through the Fifth Republic, a system that continues to shape the French political system today. De Gaulle's insistence on national sovereignty, his pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent, and his efforts to restore France's global stature all contributed to the lasting legacy of his presidency. Though he no longer held power, de Gaulle's influence was still felt throughout the world. His independent foreign policy, which had emphasized France's autonomy from both the United States and the Soviet Union, set a precedent for future French presidents. De Gaulle's foreign policy was grounded in the idea that France should not be subordinated to the interests of any other nation. This principle became a central feature of French diplomacy, and had been upheld by successive generations of French leaders. His stance on NATO, his development of the French nuclear deterrent, and his efforts to assert France's role as a global power were all part of his broader vision for a strong, independent France. Domestically, de Gaulle's policies had left a lasting impact on the French economy and society. The period of economic growth known as the Trente Glorious, the Glorious 30, had helped transform France into one of the world's leading economies, and his social policies had laid the foundation for the modern French welfare state. De Gaulle's vision of a France that was both economically prosperous and socially just continued to resonate in the decades following his presidency. Yet, despite his accomplishments, de Gaulle's final years were marked by a sense of isolation. The political environment in France had changed, and the world around him was evolving. The social movements of the 1960s, the rise of new political forces, and the challenges of a rapidly changing global order meant that de Gaulle's ideas were no longer as dominant as they had been during his presidency. Nonetheless, de Gaulle remained steadfast in his beliefs, and his influence continued to shape the political landscape of France and beyond. De Gaulle's death on November 9th, 1970, at the age of 79, marked the end of a remarkable chapter in French history. His passing was met with an outpouring of a national grief, and his funeral in Colombey-les-Deux-Églises was attended by thousands of mourners, including political leaders and citizens from across the country. De Gaulle's death marked the end of a political era, but his legacy lived on both in France and around the world. In the years following his death, de Gaulle's legacy continued to be a subject of intense debate. Some viewed him as a visionary leader who had restored France's dignity and global standing, while others criticized his authoritarian style and his centralization of power. However, there was little dispute about the profound impact he had on the course of French history. His leadership during the war, his creation of the Fifth Republic, and his efforts to ensure France's independence and sovereignty cemented his place as one of the most important figures in 20th century French history. De Gaulle's influence extended far beyond France. His vision of a multipolar world in which nations could assert their independence and sovereignty resonated with many other countries, particularly in Africa and the developing world. His foreign policy, which sought to create a more balanced global order, set a model for many nations seeking to assert their autonomy in the post-colonial era. As the decades passed, de Gaulle's legacy remained a cornerstone of French political thought. His insistence on sovereignty, independence and national pride continued to inspire generations of French politicians and citizens. The institutions he created, particularly the Fifth Republic, have endured, and his influence on French political culture is still felt today. In the end, Charles de Gaulle's life and legacy were defined by his unwavering commitment to the ideals of freedom, independence and national pride. He was a man who faced incredible challenges, both on the battlefield and in the political arena, yet his resolve and vision for France never wavered. From the liberation of France during World War II to the creation of the Fifth Republic, de Gaulle left an indelible mark on his country and the world. Charles de Gaulle's impact on both France and the world transcended his years in office. While his presidency marked a time of political and economic transformation in France, his broader legacy continues to shape international relations and the concept of national sovereignty in the 21st century. As the leader who transformed post-war France, de Gaulle's influence extended far beyond his homeland, leaving a profound mark on global diplomacy, military strategy, and the ideals of independence that resonate today. De Gaulle's tenure as the leader of France was defined by his staunch belief in the importance of sovereignty, both for France and for the world's nations. His rejection of foreign dominance, particularly from the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, made him a key figure in the geopolitics of the 20th century. His policies, especially his pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent and his withdrawal from NATO's integrated military command, set a precedent for countries seeking autonomy and a more assertive foreign policy, especially during the Cold War. One of de Gaulle's most significant contributions to global politics was his vision of a multipolar world, in which countries would not be subordinated to the interests of any one power. This vision was particularly relevant in the context of the Cold War, when the world was divided into two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. De Gaulle's refusal to align France too closely with either bloc, and his insistence on maintaining French independence, was seen as both bold and controversial. For de Gaulle, France's independence was paramount. His decision to develop France's own nuclear weapons program, culminating in France's first successful atomic test in 1960, was a central part of his vision for national sovereignty. While other NATO countries relied on the US, nuclear umbrella for their defence, de Gaulle believed that France needed its own independent deterrent to ensure its security and to preserve its position on the global stage. His development of the force de frappe, strike force, was intended to give France the means to defend itself, regardless of the strategic calculus of other nations. This pursuit of nuclear independence positioned France as a major power in its own right, and it became a defining aspect of de Gaulle's foreign policy. De Gaulle's view of Europe also reflected his belief in national sovereignty and independence. While he supported European integration, he envisioned a Europe of sovereign nations, not a superstate under centralized control. He was a key architect of the European Economic Community, or EC, but his support was tempered by his desire for a Europe in which France retained its independence. De Gaulle famously vetoed the United Kingdom's application to join the EEC twice, citing concerns that British membership would tilt the balance of power too much toward the United States. His vision was of a Europe united by economic cooperation, but led by independent sovereign states. This stance on European unity created friction with other European leaders, particularly those in the United Kingdom and the United States, but it also earned de Gaulle respect as a leader who was unafraid to challenge the status quo in the pursuit of what he saw as France's best interests. His actions on the European stage set a precedent for future French leaders, influencing the direction of the European Union and its political landscape for decades to come. De Gaulle's impact on global diplomacy was not limited to Europe. His foreign policy also sought to assert France's influence in the developing world, particularly in Africa. During his presidency, de Gaulle worked to maintain France's close relationships with its former colonies, providing political and military support to several African nations. His vision of France's role in the world was one in which the country remained a leading global power, particularly through its relationships with the nations of Africa and the broader French-speaking world. His policy of France-Afrique aimed at maintaining French influence in its former colonies, but it was also a pragmatic attempt to ensure that France's interests were protected in a rapidly changing post-colonial world. De Gaulle's leadership during the Algerian War of Independence, 1954 to 1962, had a profound effect on the French approach to colonialism. His decision to grant Algeria independence, while controversial at the time, marked the end of an era of French colonialism and was a turning point in the history of decolonization. De Gaulle's ability to negotiate the Evian Accords, which led to Algerian independence, demonstrated his pragmatism and his understanding of the changing political realities of the post-war world. While some criticized his actions as a betrayal of French interests, de Gaulle viewed them as a necessary step toward ensuring France's long-term stability and preserving its role as a sovereign power. The legacy of de Gaulle's foreign policy was not just about his actions, but also about his ideas. His vision of an independent France, capable of standing on its own in the world, resonated with leaders and nations across the globe. His advocacy for national sovereignty, his rejection of foreign dominance, and his belief in the importance of strong independent leadership influenced many countries, particularly those emerging from colonialism or seeking to assert themselves in a world dominated by superpowers. De Gaulle's ideas also influenced the way that France viewed its role in international organizations. He was skeptical of supranational institutions that he felt could undermine French sovereignty. While he recognized the importance of the United Nations, he was reluctant to see France's interests subsumed by broader global initiatives. This skepticism extended to NATO, which he saw as a tool of US influence. By pulling France out of NATO's integrated military command in 1966, de Gaulle signalled his commitment to an independent French foreign policy and to a Europe that was not beholden to the interests of either the US or the Soviet Union. On the domestic front, de Gaulle's leadership transformed France into a modern, industrialized nation. His economic policies, which included significant investments in infrastructure, nuclear energy and technology, helped position France as a global economic power. His tenure also saw the expansion of the French welfare state and the development of key social programs that improved the quality of life for many French citizens. Under de Gaulle's leadership, France became a more confident and self-reliant nation, prepared to navigate the complexities of the Cold War and beyond. De Gaulle's ability to maintain French unity, independence, and national pride through the years of war and turmoil was one of his most enduring legacies. His legacy endures not just in the institutions he created, most notably the Fifth Republic, but in the core principles he championed: sovereignty, national pride, and the ability to assert one's independence on the world stage. His impact on French and global politics remains immeasurable, and his vision for an independent France continues to influence the country's political leadership to this day. Charles de Gaulle was not just a political and military leader. He was also a thinker, a strategist, and a visionary whose philosophical beliefs shaped his policies and approach to leadership. His worldview was deeply informed by his understanding of history, his personal experiences, and his unwavering commitment to the values of sovereignty, independence, and national pride. De Gaulle's philosophy, though complex, was rooted in his belief in the importance of France's autonomy and its place in the world. One of the central tenets of de Gaulle's philosophy was his belief in the concept of national sovereignty. For de Gaulle, sovereignty was the cornerstone of France's identity as a nation. He believed that for France to remain strong and independent, it needed to assert its own will on the global stage, free from the influence of foreign powers. This belief was evident in his policies throughout his career, from his rejection of NATO's integrated military command to his development of France's independent nuclear deterrent. De Gaulle's insistence on France's autonomy was a defining feature of his presidency and his foreign policy. De Gaulle was deeply critical of any political system that threatened the sovereignty of the French state. He viewed the international order of the post-war period, particularly the dominance of the United States and the Soviet Union, as a challenge to France's independence. His pursuit of an independent French nuclear program, his withdrawal from NATO's military command, and his efforts to maintain France's autonomy within the European community were all driven by his commitment to safeguarding France's sovereignty in an increasingly interconnected and polarized world. At the same time, de Gaulle was not a nationalist in the traditional sense of the word. While he believed in the importance of national sovereignty, he was also deeply committed to the idea of French unity, both within the country and in its relations with other nations. His vision for France was one of strength through unity, not division. This was evident in his leadership during the Algerian War, where he sought to end the conflict and bring about peace, despite the political and social divisions it caused within France. De Gaulle recognized that for France to remain strong, it needed to reconcile its differences and work together as a nation. De Gaulle's approach to leadership was also influenced by his understanding of history. He saw himself as a figure destined to restore France's greatness, drawing inspiration from the historical figures who had shaped the country's past, particularly figures like Napoleon Bonaparte and Charles Martel. De Gaulle often spoke of France's historical mission to be a beacon of civilization, culture, and independence in the world. This belief in France's exceptionalism was not just about national pride, it was also a guiding principle for how he approached international relations. De Gaulle believed that France had a unique role to play in shaping the future of Europe and the world, and he was determined to ensure that the country would not be sidelined by the superpowers of the time. De Gaulle's vision of France's place in the world was deeply connected to his belief in the importance of European unity. While he was skeptical of supranational institutions that threatened France's sovereignty, he was a strong advocate for a united Europe of sovereign nations. He saw Europe as a continent that could provide balance and stability in a world dominated by the United States and the Soviet Union. De Gaulle's vision for Europe was not one of centralized power, but of cooperation between independent nations. He believed that Europe could be a counterbalance to the superpowers, offering a third way in global politics that emphasized diplomacy, sovereignty, and mutual respect among nations. De Gaulle's commitment to a united yet sovereign Europe was reflected in his approach to European integration. He was a key architect of the European Economic Community, EEC, which aimed to create a common market and foster closer economic ties between European nations. However, de Gaulle's vision for Europe was not one of political union or federalism. He was wary of any attempt to centralize power in Brussels, fearing that it would undermine the sovereignty of individual nations, particularly France. De Gaulle's opposition to British membership in the EEC in the 1960s was driven by his belief that British participation would tilt the balance of power too far in favour of the United States, which he saw as a threat to European independence. De Gaulle's vision of European unity was also influenced by his understanding of history. He saw Europe as a continent that had been torn apart by war and division for centuries. The two world wars of the first half of the 20th century, along with the rise of totalitarian regimes, had left Europe in a state of disarray. De Gaulle believed that the only way to prevent future conflicts was to ensure that European nations worked together, but on their own terms. He saw Europe as a continent that needed to regain its strength and independence, and he believed that France had a pivotal role to play in this process. De Gaulle's philosophy also encompassed a deep belief in the importance of leadership. He saw leadership as an expression of national will and character, and he believed that strong visionary leadership was necessary for a country to thrive. Throughout his career, de Gaulle positioned himself as the leader who would restore France to greatness, and he never wavered in his belief that his leadership was vital to the country's future. This sense of destiny and responsibility was central to de Gaulle's persona and to his approach to governance. In his speeches and writings, de Gaulle frequently emphasized the importance of the individual in shaping history. He believed that history was not shaped by mere chance, but by the actions of individuals who were able to rise above the challenges of their time. He viewed his own leadership as part of a larger historical narrative, one in which France had a vital role to play. De Gaulle's sense of duty to his country and his vision for its future were deeply personal, and he often spoke of the sacrifices he had made in service to France. De Gaulle's political philosophy was not just about policy, it was about creating a sense of national identity and pride. For de Gaulle, France was more than just a country. It was a symbol of freedom, sovereignty, and dignity in a world often dominated by larger powers. His leadership, both during the war and in his later presidency, was guided by this belief in France's exceptionalism and its ability to shape the course of history. In the end, de Gaulle's vision for France was one of independence, strength, and unity. His philosophy was centered on the belief that a nation's sovereignty and independence were paramount, and that leadership should be based on these principles. His actions, from his leadership of the Free French forces during World War II to his creation of the Fifth Republic, were guided by his unwavering commitment to these ideals. His legacy continues to inspire French leaders and citizens today, and his vision for an independent, sovereign France remains a defining aspect of the country's identity. Charles de Gaulle's influence on global political thought extends far beyond the borders of France. His leadership, vision, and unwavering commitment to sovereignty and national independence have inspired leaders and thinkers around the world. From his firm stance on French sovereignty to his rejection of foreign dominance, de Gaulle's ideas continue to shape discussions about governance, international relations, and the role of strong leadership in times of crisis. His legacy, particularly in the context of the Cold War and post-colonial politics, continues to resonate in the world of international diplomacy. One of the most enduring aspects of de Gaulle's global influence is his approach to sovereignty. At a time when the world was divided between the superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union, de Gaulle rejected the notion of small nations being caught in the orbit of these giants. He believed that France, like other countries, had the right to assert its independence and chart its own course in the world. His decision to withdraw France from NATO's integrated military command in 1966 and his pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent were bold acts of sovereignty that sent a clear message to the world. France would no longer be a passive player in incestuous global affairs. De Gaulle's rejection of foreign control, whether through NATO, the United States, or the Soviet Union, set a precedent for other nations seeking to assert their independence in a rapidly changing world. His vision of a multipolar world in which nations could cooperate without being dominated by any one power offered an alternative to the binary world order that defined the Cold War. While the superpowers sought to divide the world into competing spheres of influence, de Gaulle's foreign policy called for a more balanced and diverse international system in which sovereignty and independence were paramount. De Gaulle's commitment to an independent foreign policy was also reflected in his vision for Europe. He was an advocate for European integration, but not at the cost of national sovereignty. His belief in a Europe of sovereign nations united by economic cooperation but not political union has influenced the trajectory of European integration in the decades since his presidency. De Gaulle's actions, particularly his veto of the United Kingdom's entry into the European Economic Community in the 1960s, highlighted his belief that Europe should be a union of independent states, not a supranational entity that could undermine the sovereignty of individual nations. His vision of Europe, which balanced economic cooperation with political independence, has continued to influence the debates about the European Union and its future. De Gaulle's stance on sovereignty and independence also resonated in the post-colonial world. As European empires collapsed and new nations emerged, de Gaulle's ideas offered a model for nations seeking to assert their autonomy. His role in granting Algeria independence in 1962, though controversial at the time, demonstrated his pragmatic approach to colonialism. De Gaulle recognized that the era of colonial empires was coming to an end, and that the future of France lay in maintaining its influence through diplomatic means rather than through military occupation. His willingness to negotiate with the Algerian independence movement was a courageous decision that reflected his understanding of the changing geopolitical landscape and his commitment to France's long-term interests. The example of de Gaulle's leadership in the context of colonialism provided a framework for many newly independent nations. His commitment to negotiation and diplomacy, even when faced with internal and external opposition, was a guiding principle for leaders in the post-colonial world who sought to balance national independence with international cooperation. De Gaulle's legacy in this regard is particularly significant in Africa, where his policy of maintaining strong relationships with former French colonies, what came to be known as France-Afrique, shaped France's post-colonial relationships for decades. De Gaulle's ideas on leadership and governance also left a lasting imprint on global political thought. His emphasis on strong, decisive leadership in times of crisis set him apart from many of his contemporaries. He believed that leadership should be grounded in the will of the nation, and that leaders had a duty to guide their countries through difficult times, even when faced with unpopular decisions. This approach was evident not only during the liberation of France in World War II, but also during his presidency, particularly when he made bold decisions like granting Algeria independence and pursuing an independent nuclear deterrent. In contrast to the parliamentary systems that were common in many European countries at the time, de Gaulle's vision for the French presidency was one of a strong executive capable of taking decisive action when necessary. His creation of the Fifth Republic, with its emphasis on presidential power, has influenced the way many countries think about executive leadership and governance. The idea that strong leadership can provide stability and direction, especially in times of crisis, continues to resonate with political leaders and thinkers around the world. De Gaulle's influence also extended to the field of military strategy. His belief in the importance of national defense and his commitment to France's independent military capabilities influenced military thought both within France and internationally. His development of the French nuclear deterrent in particular set a precedent for other countries seeking to establish independent defense capabilities outside of the influence of larger powers. De Gaulle's approach to military strategy emphasized the importance of self-sufficiency and the ability to defend national interests without relying on the protection of foreign powers. De Gaulle's ideas on leadership, sovereignty, and national independence have also influenced the political philosophies of leaders in other countries. His firm stance on French autonomy and his rejection of foreign dominance provided a model for leaders in countries across the world, from Africa to Latin America, who sought to assert their independence in the face of external pressure. De Gaulle's legacy as a champion of national sovereignty and independence continues to inspire leaders who believe in the importance of self-determination and the ability of nations to chart their own course on the global stage. In the realm of global diplomacy, de Gaulle's vision of a more balanced and independent world order has continued to resonate, particularly in the context of rising powers like China and India, who are seeking to assert their place in the global system. De Gaulle's belief that nations should not be bound by the interests of superpowers is increasingly relevant in a multipolar world where the traditional power structures are being challenged by new economic and political forces. As de Gaulle's ideas continue to shape political discourse, his legacy remains a cornerstone of modern political thought. His vision of a sovereign, independent France capable of standing on its own in a complex and changing world offers a compelling model for countries seeking to maintain their autonomy in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent global system. Whether in the context of European integration, post-colonial politics, or global diplomacy, de Gaulle's influence endures as a symbol of national pride, resilience, and the power of strong, independent leadership. Charles de Gaulle occupies a unique and prominent place in the pantheon of great world leaders. His legacy is not defined solely by the policies he implemented or the historical events he navigated, but by his broader vision for national sovereignty, his role in shaping the course of the 20th century, and his impact on the international stage. De Gaulle's leadership, resilience, and determination have solidified his position as one of the most influential figures in modern history. De Gaulle's career spanned some of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century, from the turmoil of World War II and the collapse of Nazi Germany to the challenges of the Cold War and the decolonization of Africa. Yet it is perhaps his leadership during France's darkest hours, when the country was on the brink of collapse, that sets him apart from other world leaders. In 1940, at a time when much of France had been overrun by Nazi forces and the Vichy regime had taken power, de Gaulle emerged as the symbol of French resistance. His steadfast belief in France's ability to overcome defeat and his call to arms from London became a rallying cry for the Free French forces. This moment, more than any other, defined de Gaulle's place in history as the leader who refused to let France succumb to occupation. De Gaulle's leadership in the French resistance was not only military, but also moral. In an era where many nations were either under occupation or collaboration, de Gaulle's vision for a free and sovereign France offered hope to millions of French citizens and to oppressed peoples worldwide. His message was clear. No matter how dire the situation, a nation's sovereignty was inviolable, and the will of the people could never be subdued by foreign invaders. This belief became central to de Gaulle's political philosophy and remained a defining feature of his leadership, both during the war and in his later presidency. It was this unyielding commitment to national sovereignty and independence that set de Gaulle apart from other leaders of his time. While many heads of state were constrained by the global dominance of the superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, de Gaulle refused to accept France's subordination to any external power. His pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent, his withdrawal from NATO's integrated military command, and his insistence on the importance of French autonomy in Europe were all driven by a single overarching belief that France must stand on its own as a sovereign nation, free from the dictates of foreign powers. De Gaulle's place in history is further solidified by his creation of the Fifth Republic. His vision for a strong, centralized executive was grounded in the belief that France needed a government capable of making decisive, long-term decisions. The Fifth Republic was designed to overcome the instability of the Fourth Republic, where frequent government changes and parliamentary deadlock hampered effective governance. By establishing a strong presidential system, de Gaulle ensured that France would have a stable political foundation for the future. The institutions he created, particularly the presidency, continued to serve as the cornerstone of French democracy. On the global stage, de Gaulle's foreign policy cemented his place as one of the great world leaders. He was not a passive actor in the world order, content to simply follow the lead of the United States or the Soviet Union. Instead, de Gaulle sought to carve out a distinct role for France, one that prioritized French sovereignty and independence. His vision for a multipolar world in which nations could assert their independence without being subordinated to any one superpower resonated with many leaders and thinkers around the world. His rejection of the Cold War's binary divisions between the United States and the Soviet Union was both prescient and bold, and it positioned France as a leader of nations seeking to assert their autonomy in the face of global pressure. De Gaulle's leadership during the Algerian War of Independence was another defining moment in his legacy. His decision to grant Algeria independence after years of violent conflict and political division demonstrated his pragmatic approach to governance and his willingness to make difficult decisions for the long-term benefit of France. His actions in Algeria reflected his understanding of the changing global order, where colonial empires were becoming increasingly untenable. The Evian Accords, which marked the end of the Algerian War and the country's independence, were not without controversy, but they exemplified de Gaulle's commitment to peace and national reconciliation. De Gaulle's role in shaping France's post-colonial relationships also contributed to his place among the great leaders of the 20th century. His policy of France-Afrique, which sought to maintain close ties with France's former African colonies, reflected his belief in the importance of France's continued influence in the post-colonial world. While the policy has been the subject of criticism due to its reliance on political and economic control over African nations, it also reflected de Gaulle's understanding of France's strategic interests in Africa and his desire to maintain a sphere of influence in a rapidly changing world. In terms of his personal character, de Gaulle was often described as a figure of immense dignity and gravitas. His towering physical presence, combined with his unflinching determination, made him a figure who commanded respect, both within France and internationally. He was a man who embodied the values of honor, integrity, and national pride. His speeches, often filled with references to French history and the ideals of the Revolution, were not just political statements, they were calls to national renewal. His ability to inspire and unite the French people during their darkest moments, and to guide them through the complexities of post-war reconstruction, cemented his reputation as a leader of extraordinary vision and capacity. De Gaulle's political philosophy was also shaped by his deep understanding of history. He was not a leader who sought short-term solutions. Rather, he viewed his actions as part of a long historical trajectory. His belief in the centrality of France's role in world history, and his understanding of the sacrifices made by past generations, informed his leadership decisions. His historical consciousness allowed him to see France not just as a country in the present, but as part of a larger narrative that spanned centuries. This sense of continuity and legacy gave his leadership a sense of purpose that went beyond the immediate political crises of his time. De Gaulle's place among the great world leaders is secure not only because of the political and military decisions he made, but also because of the enduring principles he upheld. His commitment to national sovereignty, his vision for an independent and strong France, and his refusal to accept defeat or subordination have left a legacy that continues to shape the political landscape of the world today. His leadership during the war, his creation of the Fifth Republic, and his independent foreign policy have all left an indelible mark on history, securing his position as one of the most important and influential figures of the 20th century. As Charles de Gaulle entered the final years of his life, he found himself looking back on a career that had shaped not only the future of France, but also the broader political landscape of the 20th century. His leadership had carried France through some of its most trying moments: wartime occupation, post-war recovery, and the creation of a new republic. And his decisions had left an indelible mark on the country's institutions, political culture, and global stature. Though he had resigned from the presidency in 1969, de Gaulle remained an influential figure in French life, and his ideas continued to resonate long after he stepped down from office. In his retirement, de Gaulle was not idle. He remained deeply engaged with political and historical affairs, though his influence was more muted. He spent much of his time in Colombey-les-Deux-Églises, the village in northeastern France where he'd made his home. His private life, however, was marked by reflection. As the architect of the Fifth Republic, the visionary who had led France to victory during World War II and helped it navigate the complexities of post-war geopolitics, de Gaulle knew that his place in history was secure, yet his retirement was not simply about resting on his laurels. He was still concerned with the direction of France, especially as the country grappled with the political and social changes of the 1960s and 1970s. De Gaulle's time away from active politics allowed him to reflect on his greatest achievements, as well as on the challenges that remained for his country. He had always been deeply concerned with the idea of French unity and independence, and in retirement he continued to observe the developments in France and the world. The tumultuous student protests of May 1968, which had shaken France and forced de Gaulle to confront a new generation of political activists, were particularly troubling to him. Though de Gaulle had resigned in the wake of the referendum defeat in 1969, he had remained a figurehead of the past, and his vision of a unified and sovereign France seemed increasingly out of step with the rapidly evolving political landscape. De Gaulle was acutely aware of the generational shifts taking place in French society. The political upheaval of the late 1960s and early 1970s, marked by widespread protests, strikes, and a growing sense of disillusionment with the political establishment, left him questioning the future of France's political system. His belief in the necessity of strong centralized leadership, which had been a cornerstone of his vision for the Fifth Republic, now seemed to be in tension with the demands of a new, more politically diverse and active populace. This shift in political and social dynamics was a reminder of how deeply de Gaulle had shaped the direction of French politics, but also of the challenges inherent in maintaining that vision in the face of evolving societal expectations. Despite these concerns, de Gaulle remained confident in the institutions he had created. His establishment of the Fifth Republic had provided France with a stable political system that allowed the country to recover from the chaos of the Fourth Republic. The new constitution he had put in place was designed to provide strong executive leadership, enabling France to weather both domestic and international crises. As de Gaulle saw it, the future of the Fifth Republic was assured, even if his vision for France's leadership might no longer be as fully realized as it had been in the early years of his presidency. De Gaulle's last years were also a time for him to reflect on the broader world. His foreign policy decisions, his assertiveness in maintaining France's sovereignty, his pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent, and his complex relationship with both the United States and the Soviet Union had positioned France as a major global player, yet the international order was changing, and de Gaulle's vision of a multipolar world in which France could assert its independence was increasingly at odds with the new realities of global power dynamics. The rise of the United States as a dominant superpower, coupled with the ongoing conflict of the Cold War, was a challenge to de Gaulle's ideal of a sovereign, independent France that could stand apart from the global superpowers. De Gaulle's thoughts on France's place in the world remained rooted in his belief in the importance of sovereignty, a theme that had defined his entire political career. In his later years, he continued to emphasize the idea that France must always maintain its independence, regardless of external pressures. His foreign policy had been built on this principle, and his view of the world order was one in which France must remain free from the influence of other powers, whether they were American, Soviet, or European. His vision of an autonomous France, unshackled from the dominance of the superpowers, was a central element of his leadership, and one that continued to guide his thoughts until his death. By the time of his passing in 1970, de Gaulle had become one of the most revered figures in French history. His leadership during World War II, his creation of the Fifth Republic, and his firm stance on national sovereignty had made him a towering figure in French and global politics. Yet despite the accolades and admiration, de Gaulle's final years were not without their challenges. The political landscape of France was shifting, and his ideal of a strong centralized presidency seemed increasingly at odds with the growing demands for democratic reform and political pluralism. De Gaulle's death was a moment of profound loss for France. Thousands of citizens mourned his passing, and his funeral in Colombey-le-Deux Église was attended by many who saw him as the embodiment of France's spirit and resilience. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy lived on in the institutions he had created, the principles he had championed, and the example he had set for future generations of French leaders. As the years passed, de Gaulle's influence continued to shape French politics and society. His vision of France as a sovereign, independent nation, one that could assert its place on the world stage without being beholden to foreign powers, remained a guiding principle for many in the country. The institutions of the Fifth Republic, which he had designed, continued to serve as the foundation of French democracy. De Gaulle's impact on global political thought also remains profound. His insistence on the importance of sovereignty, his rejection of foreign influence, and his commitment to strong visionary leadership in times of crisis have inspired leaders and thinkers around the world. His legacy endures not just in the history books, but in the ongoing debates about the role of nations in an interconnected and ever-changing world. Charles de Gaulle was, without a doubt, one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. His life was defined by an unwavering commitment to the ideals of French sovereignty, independence and strength, and he led France through some of its most difficult and transformative periods. From the darkest days of World War II, when France was under Nazi occupation, to his post-war leadership in the creation of the Fifth Republic, de Gaulle's vision and leadership shaped not only the course of French history, but also the broader geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. De Gaulle's legacy is rooted in his ability to steer France through times of crisis with unyielding resolve. His leadership during World War II, particularly his role in the French resistance, was a turning point in the nation's history. When much of France had capitulated to the Nazis, de Gaulle emerged as a symbol of defiance, steadfast in his belief that France's honour and sovereignty could not be surrendered. His radio broadcast from London in 1940, calling on the French people to continue the fight, became a rallying cry for the Free French forces and earned him the respect of citizens and allies alike. This moment of leadership during France's darkest hours cemented de Gaulle's place in history as a symbol of resistance and national pride. However, de Gaulle's influence extended far beyond his wartime heroism. His creation of the Fifth Republic, which established a strong presidential system with a centralized executive, was one of his most significant accomplishments. The instability of the Fourth Republic, with its fragmented political system and frequent changes in government, had made it difficult for France to address its post-war challenges effectively. By establishing the Fifth Republic, de Gaulle provided France with the political stability it needed to rebuild and modernize, and the system he created continues to serve as the foundation of French democracy today. De Gaulle's presidency was marked by significant achievements, both domestically and internationally. He played a central role in modernizing France's economy, steering it through the Trente Glorieuses, the Glorious 30, a period of sustained economic growth. Under his leadership, France became an industrial powerhouse, with rapid growth in key sectors like transportation, energy, and technology. His social policies, which included expanding the welfare state and investing in infrastructure, improved the quality of life for millions of French citizens. De Gaulle's vision of a modern, self-sufficient France both economically and politically, was a driving force behind his government's success during the 1960s. Yet, his legacy is also defined by his foreign policy, which was centered around the idea of maintaining France's independence on the world stage. De Gaulle's rejection of NATO's integrated military command, his pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent, and his insistence on keeping France free from foreign influence set him apart from other world leaders of the time. While the United States and the Soviet Union dominated the Cold War, de Gaulle refused to allow France to be subsumed into either superpower's sphere of influence. He believed that France, as a major world power, should chart its own course, and he was unafraid to challenge the dominant global powers to ensure that France's sovereignty was respected. De Gaulle's leadership also extended to Europe. While he was a strong advocate for European unity, his vision of Europe was not one of a centralized superstate, but of a collection of sovereign nations working together for mutual benefit. His skepticism of supranational institutions, particularly the European Economic Community, EEC, which he feared could undermine France's independence, was at the heart of his foreign policy. His refusal to allow the United Kingdom to join the EEC in the 1960s, based on his belief that Britain's membership would tilt the balance of power too far in favour of the United States, was a bold move that reflected his commitment to protecting France's interests in Europe. De Gaulle's policies in Africa also left a significant mark on global politics. Through his policy of France-Afrique, de Gaulle maintained close political, military and economic ties with many of France's former colonies. This policy ensured that France retained a degree of influence in Africa, even as the continent underwent a process of decolonization. De Gaulle's approach to African relations was pragmatic. He understood that France's influence in Africa was crucial to its global standing. However, the policy was not without controversy, as it often relied on maintaining close, sometimes opaque relationships with African leaders and regimes. Nevertheless, de Gaulle's efforts to maintain France's presence in Africa demonstrated his understanding of the importance of international influence and his belief in the strategic value of maintaining France's ties to its former colonies. At the heart of de Gaulle's political philosophy was his belief in the importance of leadership. He believed that a nation could only thrive under strong visionary leadership, and he saw himself as a servant of France's destiny. Throughout his career, he presented himself as the embodiment of the nation's will, a leader who was chosen by history to restore France's greatness and independence. This sense of destiny guided his decisions, whether in the heat of battle during World War II or in the halls of power during his presidency. His leadership was marked by a commitment to the long-term welfare of France, even at the cost of short-term political gains. De Gaulle's leadership, however, was not without its critics. His strong-willed approach to governance, which often sidelined opposition and concentrated power in the presidency, was seen by some as authoritarian. His policy of maintaining a strong executive was not always popular, particularly among those who favoured a more parliamentary system of governance. Additionally, his decision to grant Algeria independence in 1962, while ultimately seen as a pragmatic move, was met with fierce opposition from many in France, particularly those who had supported the war effort and who felt that de Gaulle had betrayed the country's interests. Despite these criticisms, de Gaulle's place in history as a transformative leader remains unquestioned. His commitment to France's sovereignty, his unwavering belief in the importance of national unity, and his ability to navigate the complexities of both domestic and international politics make him one of the great leaders of the 20th century. His legacy is felt not only in France but across the world, as his vision of an independent, sovereign nation continues to inspire leaders and citizens alike. De Gaulle's influence continues to shape the French political system today. The Fifth Republic, which he created, remains the foundation of French democracy, and his legacy as a strong leader who put France's interests above all else continues to resonate with those who value national sovereignty and independence. De Gaulle's life and leadership serve as a reminder that true statesmanship requires vision, courage, and the ability to make difficult decisions for the good of the nation, even when faced with overwhelming opposition. As the world continues to evolve and the challenges of the 21st century unfold, de Gaulle's legacy remains relevant. His insistence on sovereignty, his pursuit of an independent foreign policy, and his belief in the importance of strong visionary leadership are principles that continue to shape global politics today. De Gaulle's legacy is not just that of a French leader, but of a world leader who fought for the independence and dignity of nations, and whose impact will be felt for generations to come. As we reflect on the life of Charles de Gaulle, we're reminded of the profound impact he had on France, Europe, and the world at large. De Gaulle's journey was one of leadership marked by unwavering conviction, resilience, and an enduring belief in the sovereignty and independence of his nation. From the depths of World War II, when France seemed on the verge of collapse, to his return to power in 1958 and the creation of the Fifth Republic, de Gaulle's life was shaped by moments of immense challenge and decisive action. His political career reshaped France's political institutions, its role on the world stage and its approach to governance, while his personal philosophy of national sovereignty and independence continues to resonate to this day. Charles de Gaulle's leadership during World War II, particularly his role in the French resistance, made him a hero in the eyes of many, both within France and abroad. His refusal to accept defeat when much of France had surrendered to Nazi Germany marked him as a figure of courage and resolve. His call to arms from London, his creation of the Free French Forces, and his ultimate role in the liberation of France gave him a place in history as one of the defining leaders of the 20th century. He was not merely a military leader, but a symbol of resistance, a voice for a nation's defiance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The creation of the Fifth Republic in 1958 was one of de Gaulle's greatest achievements, providing France with the political stability that had eluded it under the Fourth Republic. The new constitution, with its strong presidency, allowed France to overcome the instability of the past and set a course for a more centralized and effective government. De Gaulle's vision for a France that was strong, independent, and capable of asserting its place in the world was realized through the institutions he crafted. His belief in a strong executive branch, able to lead the country through crises, has continued to define the political landscape of France to this day. De Gaulle's commitment to national sovereignty was a central theme throughout his career, whether advocating for France's nuclear independence, withdrawing from NATO's integrated military command, or pushing for France's autonomy in European and global affairs. De Gaulle believed that no foreign power, whether the United States or the Soviet Union, should dictate the course of French policy. His pursuit of an independent foreign policy earned him both admiration and criticism, but it cemented his place as a leader who was unafraid to challenge the global order in the name of national pride and autonomy. His legacy is also marked by his pragmatic approach to France's colonial past. De Gaulle's decision to grant Algeria independence in 1962 was a controversial and difficult decision, but it reflected his understanding of the changing global landscape and the necessity of moving beyond colonialism. While his policy in Africa, particularly through Françafrique, maintained France's influence on the continent, it also highlighted his belief that the future of France lay in building relationships based on mutual respect and sovereignty. In the later years of his presidency, de Gaulle faced challenges from a new generation of French citizens who sought more political freedoms, economic equality, and social reforms. The student protests and labour strikes of May 1968 were a reminder that the political landscape was changing, and de Gaulle, whose strong-willed leadership had once been a unifying force, now seemed increasingly out of touch with the demands of a modern, more dynamic society. Despite these challenges, de Gaulle's leadership during times of political and social unrest was marked by his steadfast commitment to maintaining national unity and stability. When de Gaulle resigned in 1969, it marked the end of an era in French politics. His decision to step down after a failed referendum on regional reforms was a reflection of his sense of responsibility to the nation. De Gaulle believed that leadership was not about clinging to power, but about doing what was best for France, even if it meant stepping aside. This act of selflessness, coupled with his long tenure as a leader of immense vision, ensured his place in history. Charles de Gaulle's legacy is deeply woven into the fabric of modern France. The Fifth Republic that he established remains the foundation of French democracy, and the values he championed, sovereignty, independence, and national pride, continue to be central to the French identity. His vision of a strong, independent France has been carried forward by subsequent generations of French leaders, and his approach to leadership serves as a model for many who believe in the importance of maintaining national autonomy in an increasingly interconnected world. Beyond France, de Gaulle's influence extended to the global stage. His policies and philosophy were a beacon of independence for many countries, especially those emerging from colonial rule, as they sought to assert their sovereignty in a post-colonial world. His rejection of the superpower-dominated world order of the Cold War, his advocacy for a multipolar world, and his commitment to an independent nuclear deterrent set a precedent for nations that wanted to assert themselves on the world stage without being dictated to by foreign powers. De Gaulle was not merely a statesman, he was a symbol of national resilience, the embodiment of a nation's capacity to endure and rise above adversity. His life and leadership remind us that true statesmanship requires more than political maneuvering. It requires vision, determination, and a deep commitment to the ideals of sovereignty and independence. As we look back on the life of Charles de Gaulle, it is clear that his legacy is far-reaching. From his leadership during World War II to his role in establishing the Fifth Republic, de Gaulle's impact on France and the world is profound and enduring. His vision of a sovereign, independent France remains a cornerstone of French political thought, and his example continues to inspire leaders around the world who seek to preserve their nation's autonomy and dignity in the face of external pressures. Charles de Gaulle's military background was integral to his understanding of governance and national strategy. His experience on the battlefield, particularly during World War I, shaped his thinking on leadership, decision-making, and the future of France. De Gaulle's formative years as an officer gave him a unique perspective on power, authority, and the importance of military readiness. His career in the French military, starting as a young officer in 1912, provided him with the tools to understand both the complexity of war and the necessity of strong, decisive leadership. During World War I, de Gaulle was thrust into the harsh realities of battle. He served in the trenches, experiencing the brutal realities of trench warfare firsthand. Despite suffering multiple injuries, including a near-fatal wound, de Gaulle's resilience on the battlefield became emblematic of his larger political philosophy, the belief that leadership required both physical and mental fortitude. He observed the strategic failures of France's military leadership during the war, which deeply impacted his later decisions and his focus on modernizing the French military. By the time World War II arrived, de Gaulle's military career had reached the position of a brigadier general. He was a firm believer in the importance of armoured warfare and mechanized units, a perspective that was controversial during the interwar years. His focus on modernizing France's military, especially through the development of tanks and other mobile warfare technologies, would later become one of the defining elements of his leadership during the war. His military ideas were often at odds with France's traditional military leaders, who clung to older, static defensive strategies particularly the reliance on the Maginot Line, a line of fortifications intended to repel German invasion. This reliance on outdated strategies played a significant role in France's early defeats during World War II. De Gaulle's military thinking was informed by his belief in the importance of France's sovereignty and national strength. As he led the Free French forces from London during World War II, he employed tactics that emphasized both military innovation and French unity. He understood that France needed to modernize its approach to war, and that its political and military strategies had to reflect a nation that refused to be defeated or subjugated. His military leadership laid the groundwork for his later political decisions, as he sought to instill the same principles of resilience, independence, and modernity into France's political institutions. A key element of Charles de Gaulle's political philosophy was his belief in the idea of French exceptionalism. For de Gaulle, France was not just another European power, it was a nation with a unique history, mission, and responsibility on the world stage. This belief in France's exceptional role in world history was reflected in his political, military, and diplomatic actions throughout his career. De Gaulle's sense of French exceptionalism was rooted in the country's historical contributions to civilization, particularly its role in the Enlightenment, its political revolution, and its cultural influence. He viewed France's history not just in terms of territorial conquest or military power, but in the contributions it had made to the broader intellectual and moral landscape of the world. His worldview was shaped by the notion that France had a special role to play in shaping international norms, advocating for human rights, and championing the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. This sense of exceptionalism was particularly evident in de Gaulle's foreign policy. He believed that France's history gave it the moral authority to act as a global leader, one that could assert its independence in international affairs without being dictated to by other powers. His refusal to align France too closely with the United States or the Soviet Union during the Cold War was a testament to his belief that France should pursue its own path, free from the influence of the superpowers. Whether it was in his decision to withdraw from NATO's integrated military command or his refusal to recognize the Soviet bloc's influence, de Gaulle's foreign policy was driven by the idea that France's exceptional status required a degree of autonomy and independence that was unparalleled by other nations. De Gaulle's belief in French exceptionalism was also evident in his approach to the European Union. While he was an advocate for European integration, he consistently insisted that France must remain at the heart of any European project. His rejection of British membership in the European Economic Community (EEC) in the 1960s was driven by his belief that the United Kingdom, as a close ally of the United States, would skew European policies in favour of American interests. For de Gaulle, Europe was not just a collection of nations, it was a community of sovereign states in which France would play a leading role. In the post-colonial world, de Gaulle's exceptionalism manifested itself in his policies toward Africa. He maintained close ties with many of France's former colonies, viewing them not as territories to be exploited but as key partners in France's global influence. This policy, known as France-Afrique, was grounded in de Gaulle's belief that France's unique history and cultural ties to Africa allowed it to play a central role in the political and economic development of the continent. Though the policy has been controversial, it highlighted de Gaulle's commitment to maintaining France's influence on the global stage, particularly in the context of its historical ties to Africa. De Gaulle's belief in French exceptionalism was also reflected in his efforts to preserve France's cultural and intellectual heritage. He was a passionate defender of the French language, arts, and traditions, seeing them as integral to France's identity. His policies to promote French culture internationally, through the establishment of institutions like the Alliance Française and the development of France's cultural diplomacy, were part of his broader vision of France as a beacon of civilization and moral leadership in the world. Charles de Gaulle's legacy is one that continues to shape both the political landscape of France and global diplomacy. His leadership during times of crisis, his vision for France's role in the world, and his commitment to national sovereignty have left an indelible mark on the 20th century. His influence can still be seen in the institutions he created, the political principles he championed, and the examples he set for future leaders. The Fifth Republic, which de Gaulle founded in 1958, remains the cornerstone of French governance. The centralized executive system he put in place has ensured political stability in France for over 6 decades, allowing the country to navigate both domestic challenges and global changes. The strength of the presidency, which de Gaulle emphasized, has allowed France to make decisions with authority and resilience, a characteristic that has helped it maintain its global standing. Globally, de Gaulle's vision of a sovereign and independent France continues to influence French foreign policy. His refusal to align France too closely with any one superpower, his emphasis on European unity without sacrificing national sovereignty, and his commitment to a French nuclear deterrent have all contributed to France's unique role in the international community. His legacy has inspired leaders and policymakers in countries seeking to assert their autonomy and maintain their independence in an interconnected world. Charles de Gaulle's legacy is not just found in the institutions he created or the policies he enacted during his lifetime, but also in the lasting impact he had on future generations of French leaders. His emphasis on national sovereignty, strong executive leadership, and the importance of an independent foreign policy became guiding principles for many of his successors. De Gaulle's influence extended well beyond his time in office, and his model of leadership has shaped France's political development in the decades following his resignation. One of the most significant aspects of de Gaulle's legacy is the creation of the Fifth Republic, a political system that has provided France with stability and coherence. When de Gaulle left office in 1969, the Fifth Republic was well established and functioning, with a political system that combined elements of both presidential and parliamentary governance. The centralized executive system, which de Gaulle championed, has allowed subsequent French presidents to wield considerable power, making them central figures in the country's political and diplomatic life. The political stability of the Fifth Republic has allowed France to navigate changing international dynamics and to remain a key player on the global stage. Though de Gaulle's resignation marked the end of his presidency, the political structure he created continued to shape the way France was governed. His emphasis on a strong presidency, which could make decisive decisions in times of crisis, was not only integral to his own leadership but also a model for future French leaders. Successors such as Georges Pompidou, François Mitterrand, Jacques Chirac, and Nicolas Sarkozy followed in de Gaulle's footsteps by adopting his approach to national governance, particularly in their commitment to defending France's independence and global standing. De Gaulle's influence on future French presidents extended to his emphasis on national sovereignty in foreign policy. His refusal to allow France to be subordinated to any foreign power, especially the United States or NATO, has resonated with many French leaders who have followed his example. While France has maintained strong relationships with its allies, particularly the United States, French leaders have continued to assert France's independence in areas such as defense policy, nuclear deterrence, and international diplomacy. The legacy of de Gaulle's vision for France as a sovereign nation, with the capacity to act independently, remains a central tenet of French foreign policy today. De Gaulle's insistence on Europe as a collection of sovereign nations, not a centralized superstate, also influenced French leadership after his time in office. His vision of a united Europe, where nations cooperate economically but retain their independence, remains a guiding principle for many French leaders. Though the European Union has expanded and integrated in ways de Gaulle may not have fully anticipated, his belief in the importance of national sovereignty within Europe has continued to shape the debates over European integration. In recent years, as the European Union has faced growing concerns about centralisation and loss of sovereignty, de Gaulle's warnings about the dangers of sacrificing national identity for the sake of economic or political union have become increasingly relevant. Beyond France, de Gaulle's influence extended to the broader international community. His insistence on the importance of sovereignty and independence for all nations resonated with post-colonial leaders and emerging powers. In Africa, for example, de Gaulle's policy of France-Afrique sought to maintain strong relationships between France and its former colonies. While this policy has been criticised for its paternalistic aspects and its association with political and economic control, it also reflected de Gaulle's belief in maintaining strong ties with countries that shared France's values and history. His actions in Africa, while controversial, demonstrated his broader belief in the importance of French leadership and influence on the global stage, especially in the developing world. De Gaulle's vision for France as a global power was not limited to Europe and Africa. His pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent, which culminated in France's successful atomic test in 1960, positioned France as one of the world's nuclear powers. By establishing France as a self-reliant nuclear force, de Gaulle ensured that France would be able to defend itself without depending on the United States or any other nation. This policy of nuclear independence was a cornerstone of France's defense strategy during the Cold War and remains a central part of its military doctrine today. De Gaulle's leadership and vision also had a profound impact on other world leaders. His ability to balance national sovereignty with global diplomacy and his insistence on maintaining a strong and independent nation in a polarized world has served as a model for many leaders seeking to assert their nation's independence in the face of superpower influence. His refusal to follow the dictates of either the United States or the Soviet Union, while still engaging with both, set a precedent for future leaders who sought to chart their own course on the world stage. From the Middle East to Latin America, de Gaulle's emphasis on sovereignty, national pride and independence continues to inspire leaders around the world. De Gaulle's foreign policy decisions, particularly his leadership during the Cold War, also left a lasting mark on global diplomacy. His rejection of the bipolar world order dominated by the United States and the Soviet Union paved the way for a more diversified global order, in which smaller nations could assert their autonomy. De Gaulle's approach to international relations emphasized the importance of diplomacy, negotiation, and a balance of power in a world where global superpowers sought to dominate the political landscape. His insistence on France's independence in both the military and diplomatic arenas has been a model for countries seeking to maintain their sovereignty in an increasingly interconnected world. De Gaulle's impact on global politics, particularly his efforts to create a more balanced and independent world order, remains one of his most significant contributions. His leadership helped shape the way France viewed its role in the world and influenced the broader global political landscape. De Gaulle's legacy of sovereignty, independence, and leadership continues to inspire countries and leaders striving for self-determination in the modern era. Charles de Gaulle's influence on France extended far beyond the realms of politics and military strategy. His vision for France was deeply tied to the country's national identity, culture, and place in the world. De Gaulle understood that a nation's strength lay not only in its political institutions and military might, but also in its cultural fabric. His leadership helped to reaffirm and redefine what it meant to be French, both in the context of Europe and on the global stage. Through his political decisions, cultural diplomacy, and personal example, de Gaulle had a profound impact on how the French saw themselves and how they were seen by the world. One of de Gaulle's key contributions to French national identity was his firm belief in the centrality of the French language and culture. He saw language as the cornerstone of France's uniqueness, a symbol of its history, values, and intellectual tradition. As president, de Gaulle took significant steps to protect and promote the French language, which he believed was under threat by the influence of English and the rise of American culture. This commitment was not merely about cultural preservation. For de Gaulle, the French language was a vital part of France's sovereignty, serving as a marker of national identity and independence. His defense of the French language was central to his broader vision of maintaining France's distinctiveness in an increasingly globalized world. De Gaulle's advocacy for the French language was not just limited to domestic policy, but extended to international diplomacy. He sought to promote French as a language of culture, diplomacy, and international relations. Under his leadership, France supported the establishment of cultural institutions such as the Alliance Française, which aimed to spread the French language and culture worldwide. His policies promoted the role of French as a global language, reinforcing France's image as a leading cultural and intellectual force. De Gaulle's emphasis on the cultural influence of the French language also tied into his broader vision of France as a beacon of civilization, a country whose cultural and intellectual heritage was meant to inspire the world. De Gaulle's commitment to preserving and promoting French culture was also reflected in his approach to the arts and cultural institutions. He was a patron of French culture, seeing the arts as a vital part of national identity and pride. His presidency saw significant investments in cultural projects, including the development of public museums, the restoration of historical monuments, and the expansion of France's cinema industry. De Gaulle believed that a nation's cultural wealth was just as important as its political or economic strength, and he sought to ensure that France's cultural heritage would continue to thrive in the post-war era. This focus on culture was also part of de Gaulle's broader vision for France's role in the world. He saw France not just as a political and military power, but as a cultural leader. De Gaulle's international diplomacy often involved promoting French culture as part of France's soft power. His efforts to maintain strong cultural ties with France's former colonies in Africa, for instance, were not just about maintaining political influence, but also about preserving cultural bonds. His concept of France-Afrique was as much about cultural diplomacy as it was about political and economic relationships. Through these cultural ties, de Gaulle aimed to solidify France's position as a global leader in the arts, philosophy, and intellectual thought. Beyond culture, de Gaulle's leadership style itself was a powerful part of the French national identity. He presented himself as the embodiment of France's historical greatness, strong, dignified, and unwavering in his commitment to the nation's independence. His physical presence, towering over most others, and his distinctive voice, marked by authority and calm, became synonymous with the image of France as a strong and proud nation. The way he carried himself, both in public and private, reinforced his vision of a France that was dignified, self-sufficient, and proud of its past while looking forward to the future. His personal example of leadership became a touchstone for many French citizens, and his style of governance, grounded in a sense of duty to the nation, became an integral part of how the French understood leadership and national pride. De Gaulle's impact on French national identity was also shaped by his experience with the trauma of war and occupation. His leadership during the liberation of France in World War II helped to rebuild not only the physical and political structures of the country, but also its sense of self. France had suffered immense loss during the war, both in terms of lives and national pride, and de Gaulle's steadfast determination to restore France's sovereignty and dignity was a key part of how the country emerged from its period of occupation. His leadership gave the French people a renewed sense of purpose and pride, and his refusal to accept France's defeat became a symbol of resilience that continues to shape the national character to this day. In the years following the war, de Gaulle's vision of a strong, independent France continued to resonate. His creation of the Fifth Republic, with its emphasis on a powerful presidency and political stability, reflected his belief that a unified, self-reliant France was essential for the country's future. This idea of national unity was reinforced by de Gaulle's rejection of division and his insistence on the importance of preserving France's national integrity, even in the face of global and domestic challenges. His ability to unite the French people around a common vision, even during times of political unrest or social change, helped to solidify his place as a defining figure in the country's history. De Gaulle's role in the cultural and political resurgence of France in the post-war period was not just about leadership, it was about redefining what it meant to be French. His ideas about national pride, cultural sovereignty, and the importance of strong visionary leadership reshaped how the French saw themselves and how the world saw them. De Gaulle's life and leadership served as a reminder that a nation's identity is not only defined by its political system or military might, but by its culture, its values, and its commitment to its principles. Today, de Gaulle's legacy continues to shape France's national identity. His emphasis on sovereignty, national pride, and cultural strength remains a guiding principle for many in France, and his example of strong, dignified leadership serves as a model for future generations. De Gaulle's vision of France as a global leader in culture, diplomacy, and governance endures, and his influence continues to be felt in the country's political and cultural life. Charles de Gaulle's legacy continues to exert a profound influence on modern French politics. The political system he established, the policies he implemented, and the principles he championed have shaped not only the trajectory of France's governance, but also the political culture that exists today. As the founder of the Fifth Republic, de Gaulle transformed France's political institutions, ensuring greater stability, more centralized leadership, and a stronger presidency that continues to define the French political landscape. The most enduring aspect of de Gaulle's political legacy is the structure of the Fifth Republic itself. In 1958, after the collapse of the Fourth Republic, de Gaulle sought to create a more stable and effective system of government, one that would prevent the political paralysis and constant changes in government that had marked the previous era. The solution, in de Gaulle's mind, was to establish a stronger executive branch, one that could provide decisive leadership during times of crisis and ensure continuity in governance. The result was the Fifth Republic, with its powerful presidency and a system of government that combined elements of both presidential and parliamentary systems. This model of governance has endured for over 6 decades and has proven resilient in the face of changing political dynamics. De Gaulle's vision for a strong presidency, able to act decisively and independently, has been maintained by successive French presidents. While some may have criticized the concentration of power in the executive branch, de Gaulle believed that a strong leader was essential for the stability and direction of the nation. His model has been followed, for better or worse, by every French president since, and it has allowed the country to navigate through both domestic and international challenges with a centralized decision-making structure. The Fifth Republic also provided a solution to France's perennial problem of political fragmentation. In the Fourth Republic, the constant changing of governments and the frequent formation of weak coalitions undermined the country's ability to address key issues. The Fifth Republic, by contrast, has provided a more stable political environment, where the presidency serves as a unifying force, and where the government is more capable of implementing long-term policies. This stability has been crucial for France's economic development, its role in European integration, and its influence on the global stage. Another key aspect of de Gaulle's legacy is the concept of French sovereignty, which continues to be a driving force in modern French politics. De Gaulle was unwavering in his belief that France must remain an independent and sovereign nation, free from the influence of foreign powers, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union. This idea of sovereignty continues to resonate with French political leaders today, who often seek to assert France's autonomy in international relations and protect the country's interests in the face of global pressures. De Gaulle's foreign policy decisions, his pursuit of an independent nuclear deterrent, his withdrawal from NATO's integrated military command, and his insistence on Europe as a collection of sovereign nations, have shaped France's approach to global diplomacy. Even as France has been part of the European Union, French leaders have continued to emphasize the importance of maintaining national sovereignty, and de Gaulle's example remains a point of reference for those seeking to balance European integration with the preservation of France's independence. His vision of a multipolar world, in which countries assert their autonomy while cooperating on common goals, continues to influence France's foreign policy decisions. Domestically, de Gaulle's influence can be seen in the way political leaders approach governance and national unity. De Gaulle's emphasis on strong visionary leadership and his insistence on national unity continue to inform the way French presidents view their roles. Even as France has become more politically diverse, with the rise of new political parties and movements, the centrality of the presidency remains a key feature of the French political system. French leaders today still face the challenge of navigating a complex political environment while upholding the values of national sovereignty and unity that de Gaulle championed. While de Gaulle's political legacy is most directly tied to the institutions of the Fifth Republic, his broader philosophy of leadership has influenced French political culture in more subtle ways. De Gaulle's leadership style, marked by its stoic determination, its focus on national pride, and its commitment to France's independence, continues to serve as a model for many French politicians. His ability to stand firm in the face of both domestic and international challenges, and his willingness to make difficult decisions for the long-term benefit of France, are qualities that are admired by many in the political establishment. At the same time, de Gaulle's legacy is not without its critics. Some argue that his vision of a strong executive led to a concentration of power that undermined democratic checks and balances. Others point to his authoritarian tendencies, particularly in the later years of his presidency, as evidence of his reluctance to fully embrace political pluralism. The protests of May 1968, which challenged de Gaulle's leadership and his approach to governance, highlighted the growing dissatisfaction with his centralized style of leadership. Yet despite these criticisms, de Gaulle's vision of strong, decisive leadership has remained a defining feature of French politics. De Gaulle's influence is also evident in the way French political leaders engage with issues of national identity and sovereignty. His insistence on the importance of French culture, language, and history continues to resonate in political debates about immigration, integration, and national identity. As France faces new challenges in the 21st century, including questions about its role in the European Union, its relationship with the United States, and its position in a rapidly changing global order, de Gaulle's ideas about national sovereignty and cultural pride continue to shape the political discourse. Moreover, de Gaulle's approach to Europe and his vision of a Europe of sovereign nations rather than a federalized superstate remains a topic of debate within France. While the European Union has evolved into a more integrated political entity, there remains a strong sense among many French politicians and citizens that de Gaulle's vision of Europe should not be forgotten. The balance between European unity and national sovereignty continues to be a central issue in French politics, and de Gaulle's legacy serves as a reminder of the need to protect France's independence while engaging with its European neighbours. De Gaulle's influence extends beyond politics and governance. It is embedded in the cultural and intellectual life of France as well. His vision of a France that was both politically and culturally independent remains a guiding principle for many in the country today. His emphasis on the importance of French culture, language, and intellectual tradition has shaped the way France presents itself to the world and how it engages with its own history. De Gaulle's commitment to preserving and promoting French culture in the face of globalizing forces continues to resonate with those who see national culture as an essential part of a nation's identity and strength. Charles de Gaulle's approach to leadership, governance, and foreign policy continues to serve as a powerful model for nations seeking to assert their sovereignty in an increasingly globalized world. His unwavering commitment to the independence of France, his rejection of subordination to foreign powers, and his vision of a world in which sovereign nations could stand independently without being subject to the influence of larger powers remains relevant today. In an era marked by multinational organizations, superpower diplomacy, and complex international relationships, de Gaulle's emphasis on national autonomy offers valuable lessons for countries navigating the challenges of global politics. At the heart of de Gaulle's political philosophy was his belief in the importance of national sovereignty. For him, sovereignty was not merely a legal or political concept, it was the lifeblood of a nation's identity. De Gaulle firmly believed that no nation, especially one as influential as France, should ever surrender its autonomy or allow itself to be subordinate to the interests of foreign powers, whether through military alliances, economic dependence, or international organizations. This belief was at the core of his decisions to develop an independent nuclear deterrent, withdraw France from NATO's integrated military command, and pursue a foreign policy that was rooted in France's own interests, free from the influence of superpowers. De Gaulle's leadership provided a framework for other nations, particularly those emerging from colonial rule or seeking to assert themselves in a post-Cold War world, to follow. In many ways, de Gaulle's policies and philosophy became a blueprint for countries seeking to maintain their independence in the face of external pressure. His model emphasized the importance of autonomy, the right to self-determination, and the ability of smaller nations to carve out their place on the global stage without being dictated to by the larger powers. De Gaulle's insistence on France's independent foreign policy was particularly significant during the Cold War, when the world was divided into two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Many nations felt forced to align themselves with one of the two blocs, either out of necessity or ideological preference. But de Gaulle's approach was different. He refused to accept the binary world order that demanded countries to choose sides, instead advocating for a multipolar world where nations could act independently. His belief in the importance of balancing power among nations, without any single country or bloc dominating the global political landscape, remains an influential perspective in modern international relations. In the years following de Gaulle's leadership, his vision of a multipolar world where nations could assert their sovereignty without being bound by the interests of the superpowers continued to influence global political thought. Many countries, particularly those in the developing world, looked to de Gaulle's example when navigating the complex geopolitical dynamics of the 20th and 21st centuries. De Gaulle's steadfast refusal to compromise on France's sovereignty, even in the face of immense pressure, served as a model for nations seeking to assert their independence in a world dominated by larger powers. For countries in the global south, de Gaulle's example was particularly inspiring. His approach to decolonization, especially in relation to Algeria, reflected a pragmatic understanding of global shifts. De Gaulle recognized that the age of the European colonial empires was coming to an end, and that nations could no longer hold on to colonies through military force or political manipulation. His decision to grant Algeria independence, while deeply controversial in France, reflected his understanding of the changing geopolitical landscape and his belief that true sovereignty for all nations, including former colonies, was essential for global peace and stability. This approach to decolonization, rooted in the belief that nations must respect each other's independence and sovereignty, has influenced how many countries view their relationships with former colonial powers today. De Gaulle's policies regarding the European Union also reflect his commitment to sovereignty. While he was a strong advocate for European integration, his vision was one of a Europe composed of independent sovereign states, cooperating economically and politically without sacrificing their autonomy. His resistance to the idea of a fully integrated European superstate, where power would be concentrated in supranational institutions, has continued to shape discussions around European unity. Even as the European Union has evolved, de Gaulle's insistence on maintaining national sovereignty within Europe remains a point of reference for leaders and policymakers who seek to balance economic cooperation with the preservation of their country's independence. In the modern era, as global interdependence grows and multinational organizations become more influential, de Gaulle's emphasis on sovereignty has become an even more relevant issue. Countries that feel their national interests are being undermined by global institutions or powerful states often look to de Gaulle's example as a reminder of the importance of asserting their autonomy, whether in the context of international trade negotiations, climate agreements, or military alliances. De Gaulle's insistence on maintaining national sovereignty remains a powerful influence on global politics. One of the most important lessons from de Gaulle's leadership is the importance of having a clear, independent voice in global affairs. He recognized that the ability to act autonomously, whether in the development of nuclear deterrence, in rejecting foreign military influence, or in forging independent diplomatic relationships, was crucial to France's survival and influence in the world. This focus on independent action has become increasingly important for many nations in the 21st century, as they seek to navigate the complexities of a multipolar world while maintaining their sovereignty and national identity. De Gaulle's example is also important for understanding the role of leadership in shaping a nation's course. His leadership was defined not by political partisanship or temporary interests, but by a clear vision of what France's future should look like. His ability to unite the French people around a common cause, particularly during the difficult years of the war and the post-war reconstruction period, set him apart from other leaders. In the modern world, where many leaders attempted to prioritize short-term gains or follow the influence of larger powers, de Gaulle's vision of leadership remains an example of steadfast commitment to long-term national goals. In conclusion, Charles de Gaulle's leadership continues to serve as a model for sovereign nations seeking to assert their independence and navigate the complexities of a globalized world. His insistence on France's sovereignty, his commitment to a multipolar world, and his belief in the power of strong, independent leadership continue to shape global political thought. De Gaulle's legacy remains a beacon for nations that wish to maintain their autonomy and play an active, independent role in shaping the global order. As we approach the final reflection on Charles de Gaulle's life and legacy, it's clear that his influence stretches far beyond his time as France's president. His contributions to French national identity, global sovereignty, and international diplomacy continue to resonate in modern political thought. De Gaulle's vision, often described as a blend of pragmatism and idealism, has not only shaped French politics, but also influenced global discussions on leadership, governance, and national autonomy in the 21st century. De Gaulle's legacy is especially pertinent in a time of shifting global power dynamics. The world today is increasingly multipolar, with rising powers like China, India, and others asserting their influence alongside traditional Western powers. In many ways, de Gaulle's belief in a world where nations retain their independence and sovereignty despite external pressures is more relevant than ever. His insistence on France's independence, whether in the context of military alliances, economic partnerships, or cultural diplomacy, provides a blueprint for nations seeking to navigate a world where superpower dominance no longer dictates global outcomes. De Gaulle's impact on Europe continues to echo in the ongoing debates about the future of the European Union. His vision for Europe was one of cooperation among sovereign states, not the centralization of power in a superstate. While the EU has made significant strides toward integration, the tension between national sovereignty and supranational governance remains a central issue. De Gaulle's model of European cooperation, which balances independence with unity, is particularly relevant as countries within the EU grapple with challenges such as immigration, economic inequality, and the desire to retain cultural identities within the framework of a broader European project. The rise of populist and nationalist movements across Europe, many of which emphasize the need to protect national sovereignty, can be seen as a continuation of de Gaulle's vision in the modern European context. De Gaulle's focus on sovereignty is not confined to Europe. His global vision has continued to influence how nations, particularly those in the global south, approach their place in the international order. In an era of globalization, where economic dependencies and international agreements often seem to diminish the power of individual states, de Gaulle's insistence on the importance of maintaining a nation's autonomy resonates with many leaders in developing countries. His example provides a model for countries seeking to assert their sovereignty in a world increasingly influenced by multinational corporations, international financial institutions, and powerful geopolitical players. For instance, de Gaulle's insistence on an independent nuclear deterrent for France, one that ensured the country's military independence, continues to inspire nations pursuing nuclear capabilities as part of their defense strategy. In a world where traditional power structures are in flux, and the balance of global power continues to shift, de Gaulle's approach of ensuring national security through self-reliance and strategic autonomy remains an influential model. Countries like North Korea, Iran, and India, which have sought or developed nuclear weapons, often reference de Gaulle's legacy when arguing for the right to maintain independent defense capabilities, free from outside interference. Furthermore, de Gaulle's commitment to maintaining France's cultural sovereignty has been echoed by political leaders who emphasize the importance of protecting national culture and identity in the face of globalization. Just as de Gaulle believed that French culture and language were integral to the nation's identity, modern leaders, particularly in Europe and the United States, grapple with how to preserve cultural uniqueness while engaging in an interconnected world. De Gaulle's cultural diplomacy, his support for institutions like the Alliance Française, and his investment in the arts remains a touchstone for countries seeking to ensure their cultural legacy endures, even as globalization creates new challenges. De Gaulle's philosophy also provides a model for modern leadership in times of crisis. His ability to rise above political partisanship and to navigate immense challenges, whether in wartime or in times of political unrest, offers important lessons for contemporary leaders. De Gaulle was often confronted with situations that required not just political skill but personal resolve and a deep sense of duty to his country. In a time when political polarization and crisis management dominate the global stage, de Gaulle's example of calm, decisive leadership, based on principles rather than short-term political gains, is a valuable guide for those in positions of power today. Perhaps one of de Gaulle's most important contributions to the modern world is his insistence on the idea that leadership should be rooted in the service of national ideals. He was not driven by personal ambition or political maneuvering, but by a vision of France's place in the world and its future. His leadership was always about ensuring that France could stand independently and with dignity, no matter the challenges. This commitment to the greater good, to the ideals of the French Republic and the values of sovereignty and national pride, remains a critical lesson for leaders around the world today. In the 21st century, as nations confront new challenges such as climate change, global pandemics, and economic instability, de Gaulle's vision of an independent, strong, and self-reliant nation provides a compelling framework for navigating these complex issues. His model of leadership, one that emphasizes national sovereignty, cultural pride, and strategic autonomy, continues to influence how countries around the world approach their place in the global order. De Gaulle's impact on modern France is also seen in the way political discourse continues to centre around his ideas. French politicians, regardless of their party affiliation, often refer to de Gaulle's vision of a strong sovereign France as a guiding principle. His influence on French political culture is so deeply ingrained that even those who disagree with his policies acknowledge the fundamental role he played in shaping the country's post-war identity. The institutions he created, the political philosophy he espoused, and the example he set as a leader of conviction continue to inform French politics today. In conclusion, Charles de Gaulle's life and leadership have left an indelible mark on the world. His commitment to sovereignty, his vision for an independent France, and his role as a model of leadership in times of crisis continue to resonate today. As the world faces new geopolitical, economic, and environmental challenges, de Gaulle's example remains a beacon for those who seek to assert their nation's independence and navigate the complexities of an ever-changing world order. As we conclude this journey through the life and legacy of Charles de Gaulle, we are reminded of the profound impact he had on France, Europe, and the world. From his leadership during the dark days of World War II to his creation of the Fifth Republic and his steadfast commitment to French sovereignty, de Gaulle shaped the course of history in ways that continue to influence political thought and governance today. De Gaulle's vision was one of independence, strength, and national pride. His refusal to accept defeat during the war, his creation of a new political system that provided stability, and his insistence on France's autonomy in the face of global superpowers have left a lasting imprint on the world. His legacy is not only evident in the political institutions he established, but also in the ideals he championed: sovereignty, leadership, and national identity. His model of leadership, marked by unwavering conviction, resilience in times of crisis, and a clear sense of duty to his country, offers valuable lessons for future generations of leaders. De Gaulle's ability to rise above political division and focus on long-term national interests, even when faced with immense opposition, stands as a beacon for leaders in an increasingly interconnected and complex world. Today, as nations continue to navigate the challenges of globalization, decolonization, and international diplomacy, de Gaulle's example remains relevant. His vision of a sovereign, independent nation, committed to cultural preservation and global influence, resonates with countries seeking to assert their place on the world stage. De Gaulle's legacy is also deeply ingrained in the French national consciousness. The institutions of the Fifth Republic, the values of independence and sovereignty, and the idea of strong visionary leadership continue to shape French political culture. His impact on France's national identity, both culturally and politically, is enduring. Charles de Gaulle's life reminds us that the true strength of a nation lies not just in its military power or economic prowess, but in its ability to maintain its sovereignty, protect its identity, and navigate the complexities of a rapidly changing world with dignity and resolve. As we close this exploration of de Gaulle's extraordinary life, we honour not only the man but the lasting legacy he leaves behind, a legacy that continues to shape the future of France and inspire leaders and nations around the world to assert their independence and follow their principles no matter the obstacles in their way.